just a few minutes and then we will start formally.
सरसन मुझे रिकॉर्ड की जरा परमिशन देंगे आप, क्योंकि वो होस्ट एक्चुअली
We will be shortly starting the webinar, just few more minutes. Still 3 more minutes to go before we start the formal proceedings of the webinar. Two minutes to go. Thank you for waiting and joining us today. आगे Assalamualaikum and very good afternoon, esteemed panelists, institution heads, scientists, researchers, students, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Pakistan Nuclear Society and Virtual University, I feel privileged to welcome you all to our webinar, Science Diplomacy, which is organized by Pakistan Nuclear Society in collaboration with Virtual University of Pakistan. Pakistan Nuclear Society is a representative body of highly qualified scientists, engineers, doctors, educators, and technologists associated with nuclear science, including their technological application. Since 1990, the society has emerged as a new organized nuclear science community in Pakistan for the first time, which is dedicated to the promotion of nuclear science and technology at the national level, and also to foster the networking of its practitioners. The society has more than 1,000 life members spread across Pakistan and abroad. And PNS has organized large number of conferences, seminars, workshops, and lectures in areas of nuclear power, its application in agricultural industry, in medicine, water resource management, and safety and security. Along with that, our co-host is Virtual University of Pakistan, which is one of the pioneering e-learning educational institute. And since its inception in 2002, it has been imparting knowledge by taking education to the doorstep of students using free-to-air satellite television broadcast and the internet. Virtual University allows students to follow its rigorous program regardless of their physical locations. Currently, university has 200 campuses across Pakistan with over 90 degree programs. Now we will formally commence the session. Before the formal commencement of the session, there are few housekeeping rules for participants and panelists. I would request all of you to keep your mic muted throughout the activity and keep typing your questions and queries in the chat box, which we will address at end of each talk. I will request my esteemed panelists to keep within their allotted time. We are also having live streaming on the YouTube so that all those who couldn't join us through the Zoom can attend the webinar through the YouTube. The link is posted in the chat box. Now we will formally commence the session by a recitation of few verses of Holy Quran.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
In the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful.
قل هو الله أحد.
Say, He is Allah, who is one.
الله الصمد.
Allah, the eternal refuge.
لم يلد ولم يولد.
He neither begets nor is born.
ولم يكن له كفوا أحد.
Nor is there to him any equivalent.
I think we have some issue with the recitation of Holy Quran. Can we play it again? Coming to the topic of our webinar, the science diplomacy. Concept of science diplomacy has rapidly evolved over the last decade and have perceptible effect on public policy and decision making. Science diplomacy is a catalyst for global change, but this is still unclear that how public policy maker will utilize this stimulus for uplift of mankind. Although developed countries are considered to be epitome of scientific and technological advancements, but they need to cooperate with the developing nations like Pakistan to abate global challenges, and this cooperation makes the foundation of science diplomacy. Science diplomacy, this word brings few questions to our mind. Can science issues influence international policy? Diplomats really pay attention to what scientists say when negotiation in the future of such a good ambassador of their country. For anyone wondering the relationship between science and diplomacy, the questions keep coming and belong to various areas. Trying to answer them, we have organized this webinar on science diplomacy. For this, we will start with the opening remarks by Dr. Imtinan Elahi Qureshi, President, Pakistan Society of Nuclear Sciences. He is a veteran scientist with numerous publications in the interrelated fields of atomic, nuclear, and particle physics. His areas of specialization include exotic atoms, heavy ion reaction, radon dosimetry, high energy physics. His alma maters are Punjab University, Quaid-e-Azam University, University of Surrey Guildford, and he has served in Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission in PINSTEC, spanning some 25 years, and then he represented Pakistan as a Minister Technical at the Permanent Mission of Pakistan to the United States and other international organization in Switzerland, where he had the opportunity of acquiring invaluable experience of multilateral diplomacy during 2005 to 2008. Dr. Qureshi has also served as the Executive Director of ComSats and Chairman Board of Governors of CIIT for almost 8 years. He's adjunct professor at CIIT and PIAS, where he has been teaching nuclear physics course to the graduate and undergraduate level. Dr. Qureshi was awarded Pakistan Civil Award Tamgha Imtiaz in 2004 and Fellowship of Pakistan Nuclear Society in 2010. I invite Dr. Imtinan Elahi Qureshi for the opening remarks about our webinar.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure and honor to welcome all the distinguished speakers of this webinar. We have tried to bring in the people who are the experts in their field, and I hope all the audiences will enjoy their presentations. With these words, I also would like to add the kind support of Virtual University for holding this webinar on their premises. So we are all in for a very exciting session. So I'll request the moderator to please continue with the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So we move on to the welcome address and introduction to the Science Diplomacy webinar by Professor Dr. Arshad Salim Bhatti, who is Rector, Virtual University. He's a renowned physicist and has a degree from University of Punjab, PhD degree from UK, postdoctoral degrees from Italy and USA. He has e-education experience and has developed online video lectures and web-based courses for MIT Blossoms Project, ISCO, and Virtual Laboratory. He has been regular associate and senior associate of International Center of Theoretical Physics. His last assignment was as the Dean of Faculty of Science at Comsat University. Dr. Arshad Salim Bhatti has been awarded Tamgha-e-Imtiaz in 2012 and Sitara-e-Imtiaz in 2020. Dr. Saab will introduce the important topic of science diplomacy. Over to you, Dr.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shazia. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, viewers. On behalf of Virtual University of Pakistan, I would like to welcome you all in this very exciting topic, which has actually swept the whole world in last decade, and its dimensions are still opening with respect to between the countries. The diplomatic relations, which are coming down to personal and institutional level, and where the benefits of international collaboration is benefiting in both directions, in the countries, the institutions, and the public as well. So with these remarks, I would like to start my presentation, which has two parts. Although Dr. Shazia has introduced the Virtual University of Pakistan, I would like to take liberty to spend some time, few minutes, on giving a little bit more elaborative presentation on Virtual University of Pakistan. And after that, I will come to some basic definitions and activities which are being done by science diplomacy. And these are given for the benefit of our audience, so that when the really true gurus of the field, Dr. Imtinan Qureshi, Dr. Aslam Beg, and Dr. Raheel Qamar, and Mr. Kamran Akhtar, Director General of Foreign Office, who are directly involved in doing science diplomacy, they give their presentation. So we should know what these terms are and what does it mean. On behalf of Virtual University, I would also like to thank our speakers, Mr. Kamran Akhtar from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Professor Dr. Raheel Qamar, who has joined us all the way from Morocco, representing ISESCO, a very key organization among OIC, responsible for the development of science in Islamic world. Professor Dr. Aslam Beg, a very renowned laser physicist, and who has as equal experience as project in Jordan, many nations which has put Pakistan science at the internet. So let me start. I would like to be very brief. Some of the slides you have heard with me. Start with University of Pakistan. We know we have a population of 220 Pakistan. Do you hear me now? Okay. So we have only 10% of the population group belonging to 18 to 25 years go to higher education. And there is a serious problem in giving quality education to all these people, because most of the universities are located in big cities, and then people, they don't have they don't have means to go to the city. Either they are financially handicapped, or in smaller cities we don't have quality teachers. So idea was the virtual university is to bring the higher education uh, and bring down the cost of the conventional education, and take it to the smaller towns, to the villages, and to all areas in Pakistan, using the modern ICT tools. So the approach is, we have excellent faculty in Pakistani universities, use them, develop the courses, and then present these courses, offer these courses through virtual universities, communication platforms, which include television and the internet. Okay, so the content is developed locally. We have state-of-the-art production houses for to develop the courses. We have all the facilities to develop the aid materials for these courses, and then we deliver these courses using the technology as a force multiplier. So I can come to the numbers which we at the moment in virtual university. So the mission statement is to provide extreme affordable world-class education to aspiring students all over the country, being the only Pakistani university based purely on modern information communication technologies. And all those who have actually experienced in last year and a half that all universities were closed, education mode, the difficulties and the problems which the students and the faculty faced, virtual universities well versed with those on and has means and solutions to address those problems. So we are very happy to work with other universities, institutions to overcome these barriers for delivering the education and using digital technologies. So this cartoon, this sketch actually tells how we operate. So we have a university headquarters in Lahore, where all the material is in our data center, which is delivered through internet to the virtual campuses, which can be private or which can be which are universities on the campuses, and then we use this satellite TV to to deliver our content. So we have 90 programs. If we add certificate and diplomas, the number is well over 200. Major disciplines are computer science, business management, biotechnologies, humanities, education, and mathematics. Okay, so right now we are and this number is more. 75,000 have graduated from the university. One thing which I would like to highlight here is that university is now developing the
Professor Bhatti, your mic is off.
So I'm sorry. Okay, now I'm back. So in addition to that one, training programs, DigiSkill is our flagship project with Ignite, and we have trained more than 3 million people so far. So that was a little bit about the virtual university and its activities. Now I would like to get back to the topic of today's. So science diplomacy and introduction. So diplomacy is an activity, a skill of managing international relations, typically by a country's representatives abroad. I'm sure Mr. Kamran Akhtar from Foreign Office will say a bit more about diplomacy and the ways and the means. Diplomacy times the diplomacy was done to avoid conflicts or violence. So that's where negotiate each other or resolve the conflicts or avoid violence or war between them. But the scope of diplomacy in modern world has expanded, and it almost covers all issues. Some of these issues which diplomacies can handle are given, like appeasement, counter-insurgency diplomacy, debt trap, economic diplomacy, hostage diplomacy, humanitarian diplomacy, city diplomacy, migration, nuclear, peer-to-peer diplomacy, preventive diplomacy, quiet diplomacy. We know about back-channel diplomacies as well. But one of the most important types of diplomacies is the science diplomacy, which not only involves the governments, but it involves the people and it involves the institutions. So it involves many tiers in a government and in a non-government organizations to interact with their counterparts in other countries, which can help to develop the science and technology base of the country, and also address the issues which can be solved using the science and technology. So science diplomacy, as we define, is the use of scientific collaborations among nations to address common problems and to build constructive international partnerships. It has become an umbrella term to describe a number of formal or informal technical, research-based, academic, or engineering exchanges, with notable examples including CERN, the International Space Station, ITR. These are to name a few, but there are many more, like International Center for Theoretical Physics or CESME, or then there are some initiatives in Japan and Far East, which involve many countries to take part. So in my personal opinion, a national, when goes abroad, is an ambassador of its culture and values. However, when a scientist, a technical person goes abroad, not he or she is only an ambassador of culture, also represent the and contributes to the advancement of science and technology of the nation and address the problem. I have named few problems like CERN. CERN is one of the very initial collaborative scientific research project which was initiated after the Second World War in 1954. There were 23 countries from the Europe which participated. And accepted circumference of 26 kilometers, and it is based at the border of France and Geneva. And initially there were only European countries to become member states. Israel was the only non-European country in that collaboration. And now, few years ago, CERN opened its doors doors to other member state, other countries of the world, and Pakistan became an associate member in 2015. And some of the organizations from Pakistan are participating in it, which is not only to train the human resource in science and technology, but to work at the cutting edge of scientific problems like finding the origin of the universe is one of the idea of the CERN. International Space Station is a decision was made at the government or agencies, space agencies from Japan, European Space, which is a combination of many European states and Canada. They are involved. They have made a space station in the of our space, which is used for research, scientific astronomy. Now let's diplomacy. It has got many players, many actions, and it has got multiple dimensions which need to be addressed. So we need to ask, there are 4 questions to be asked. What aspects to be addressed through science diplomacy? What actions needed to be done? Who are the actors? And what are the aims of these collaborations which we are going to do through this diplomacy? There are 2 words which are very commonly used, in and for. Science in diplomacy, science for diplomacy, and diplomacy for science. I've given some of the examples which are in these 3 domains of science diplomacy, and you can say these can take turns around. So science for diplomacy is the best example I came across is the Cold War era, when space missions jointly sent out by USA and USSR. So they used science for keeping their relations harmonized. So diplomacy for science, so multinational initiatives initiated at the diplomatic levels like ICTP or CERN, because these were the initiatives taken by the government. But then science and diplomacies are the collaborative research initiatives taken by the countries. I have given an example of Pak China Science and Technology. China and Japan, they have very strong science and technology collaborative initiatives which bring science people together using diplomatic ways. Okay, I quickly going through now. In this slide I've highlighted how many actors and activities that take place. So we can see actors, the Ministry of Science and Technology, Foreign Affairs. There are 2 key ministries coming in from the government, then government research institutions, universities. They are very key partners in science diplomacy. Think tanks we need to develop policies and the analysis of what has happened, what results we have got, and then inclusion of private research institutions and companies into this program. So we can see that. And then activities which can be taken are the policy making, planning, policy analysis, research development, and international collaborations. Looking at by realizing the importance of the science diplomacy, American Association of Advancement of Science has actually launched Center for Science Diplomacy, which actually aims to build bridges between communities, societies, nations, through closer interactions between science and diplomacy, and elevate of science in foreign policy to address national and global challenges. So that's very important. So the advanced countries have already realized the potential of the science diplomacy, and they are doing it not only for their own advancement, but they're doing it to help the developing countries by addressing their local issues. We can see this thing when we see some call by some joint research collaborations. They always highlight which areas they are going to support. So this Center for Science Diplomacy focuses on community building, capacity building, and developing the relation through diplomatic efforts. In the end, I have few slides very interesting for me at least is the education diplomacy. I think for me, before diplomacy, it was education. And the best example which I find the Jalsabhai Badr, when the prisoners from the Makkans were captured and brought to Medina, our Prophet Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam offered that the prisoners who cannot pay ransom for their for freeing themselves, if they are educated, they can teach 10 children of 10 Muslim children, teach them to write and to read, and then they get free. So I feel that was first gesture of humanity and mercy and highest morality for prisoners. Another very interesting diplomacy is the health diplomacy. In the Third Crusade, when King Richard fell ill, Salahuddin sent his physician for the treatment and sent the fruits and ice to fight the fevers. So that was another kind of diplomacy which went through during the war. So that these are two examples. In a very modern age, cricket was used as a diplomacy. That's very interesting. 1984, 85, when there was tension was high between India and Pakistan, President Ziaul Haq went to India to watch the cricket match for a day, and that visit was named as cricket diplomacy because it helped to loosen the tensions. There are other examples where China and Taiwan, it's very interesting what China has to do with cricket. China actually built 2 stadiums in West Indies, giving full aid to them in order to get Taiwan de-recognized by those states, and China was successful in that. Education diplomacy, I've just said. Fulbright is one of the largest programs which was initiated by US after Second World War to bring the nations close. The idea was to have exchange of teachers, exchange of students, so that the countries should know each other's cultures. I'm not going to go into detail. Europe is still following this one by having this Erasmus Plus program, and they have a very strong education for language learning programs among different nations. So in summer, they send their students to different countries to learn those languages. So that's part of diplomacy as well. In the last, I've taken too much time, but I would like to highlight that in 2015, ComSets organized one activity on science diplomacy where we had Honorable Chief Guest from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where the highlight the need of the science diplomacy was given. There were few science ambassadors were appointed, and then which organized few activities for popularization of science. Some more material which is available, which makes the base of diplomacy and science, and this literature is actually becoming quite heavy now. Here I would like to thank all of you for your patience, for listening me, and thank you very much for Pakistan Nuclear Science Society for organizing this activity with the help of Virtual University. I would like to thank our team, our marketing team and technical team, who have spent many hours to make this event a success. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Arshad, for a very comprehensive introduction about Virtual University and then about the science diplomacy. We have plenty of questions here, but we have to keep the time line of the webinar as well. So I will quickly go through 2 or 3 questions which have been asked. The question is about Does Pakistan has the nuclear technology can mitigate these prevailing issues regarding society? Can you comment on this, Dr. Arshad?
Hello? Sorry, can you repeat the question, please? I missed the question.
And the question was, does the Pakistan has the nuclear, dark nuclear?
No, I'm.
Dr. Arshad, can you hear me?
Yeah. No. Please repeat the question. Now I can hear you.
Okay. The question was, does Pakistan has that nuclear technology which can mitigate these prevailing issues regarding society?
Yes, of course. You see, I'm not expert in that area, probably. But we have more than 20 institutions. Dr. Shazia, you are the right person to answer this question. Actually, we are using INMOL or Nouri or all these hospitals, and these are addressing health issues of the nation. Yes, of course. Any other question?
Okay, I think no, thank you very much for your time, and we will move to our next speaker. The talk will be Bridging the Gap Through Science Diplomacy. It's Pakistan's perspective, and our esteemed speaker is Professor Dr. Muhammad Aslam Beg. He's a distinguished national professor at National Center of Physics, NCP Quaid-e-Azam University, Pakistan. And he has done his PhD in atomic and laser physics from London University and postdocs from London and Germany as well. At the National Center of Physics, he has developed atomic and laser physics laboratory. The distinctions and awards of Dr. Beg hold includes the gold medal by Pakistan Academy of Sciences, Zadeh Hashmi gold medal, Tamgha Imtiaz, Sitara Imtiaz, and Hilal Imtiaz by Government of Pakistan. And in recognition of his contribution in the field of atomic and laser physics, in the Higher Education Commission designated him as Distinguished National Professor in 2006. Dr. Muhammad Aslam Beg. Sir, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm grateful to the organizers for giving me a chance to share some thoughts about bridging gap through science diplomacy and Pakistan's perspectives. I think diplomacy is rather a word which is not very well accepted among the civilized nations. Reason being, when you say a diplomat, that means he is not clear what he wants to say, or he will try to say a few words in a different manner so that he can convey a message and in a way that he wants to get the answer. That means it is a way to influence the people. Now let me talk about the a science for diplomacy. Dr. Arshad Aslam Bhatti has already mentioned to you, but there are three kinds of diplomacies. The science for diplomacy, that means international engagement through science to develop a relationship among countries, among nations. And second is science in diplomacy. That means you try to resolve some global issues through science and through diplomatic processes. The example is the Convention of Biodiversity, Convention on Climate Change, Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, and so many others. But for us as a scientist, I think diplomacy for science is more important. And the reason is the formal diplomatic means to achieve scientific goals. And the best examples are the International Center for Theoretical Physics, CERN, SESAME, ITER, and there are so many other places like IHEP in China. Now, I would like to address this thing in a little bit broader manner. Abdus Salam, the Nobel laureate, the celebrated scientist from Pakistan, he got this idea in his very young age. He was way back in 1961. He presented his idea to UNESCO that we should build an international center, and that could be in the theoretical physics or mathematics, just to cater the needs of developing countries. So that if you have a center, you can invite the people, they can come, they can spend some time, they will interact with the scientists from the developed nations. As a result, this is the first step to bridge the gap among nations. And I really salute to Abdus Salam that he took this initiative. And way back in 1964, when he first established this center, he was interested to develop this center in Pakistan because he knew the isolation of Pakistani scientists. So he approached the government here, but somehow our diplomats or our ministers, they were not very keen about the education. They thought maybe he wants to build a hotel, of a 5-star hotel where the scientists will come, they will discuss, they will interact, they will enjoy, and they will go home. I think that was a wrong perception by these so-called diplomats in those days. But Salam managed to convince Italian government through UNESCO, and they got the money to build the center. And I have shown the center in the slide, which really is a beautiful place. My first visit to this place was way back in 1975-76. I was a young student at the time. I was doing my PhD. And Salam gave me this idea that I can write his name as a referee to different professors so that I can get acceptance for my PhD scholarship. Just imagine a person, I never met him before. It was for the first time I went there. So he actually was trying to bridge this gap. This was the difference between Pakistani working in a small city like in Karachi or in Lahore, now going to ICTP, getting exposure from the scientists working in the advanced countries. So I think this is a very nice example of setting up a facility for the scientists from the developing countries so that they can break their isolation, they can start some kind of collaborative work. Spiti Salam was interested to become the Director General of UNESCO. He got a lot of support from other countries. However, our country, our nation did not nominate him. And as a result, he was not successful. Having been him as a Director General of UNESCO, just imagine how many doors would have been opened for the scientists, for the scientific community in Pakistan. Now let me give me one more example where the science diplomacy as well as the political will has been used to develop some collaborations between Pakistan and CERN. CERN is a huge setup where it is actually one of the biggest facility where you can interact to a bunch of protons, and then you try to see what elements they are or what particles they are being generated. And the man who opened this door, his name is Professor Ishfaq Ahmed. He was in fact the chairman of Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission, a very visionary person. He thought that how to involve Pakistan in this top-notch scientific facility. So he went there. So this one picture I'm shown here is with the Llewellyn Smith. At the time, he was the Director General of CERN, and he signed a memorandum of understanding. But only signing this memorandum of understanding is not sufficient. You have to follow it up. Then he came back. He tried to convince different government officials. And I remember our general who was the president, he went to CERN as well. And in this picture, you can see the Nawaz Sharif along with Ishaq Dar. And now the lady in between is, in fact, now the Director General of CERN. And along with there is a person, Hafiz Hurani. I think our nation should be thankful to not only Dr. Ashfaq Ahmed, but Dr. Hafiz Hurani, because he was the man working at CERN. He was paving the way to start a workable collaboration with Pakistani scientists. And with his efforts, the Pakistan has become the member state of CERN. And now, being a member state, you can avail a lot of opportunities. You can bid for, let's say, if you want to build some equipment, you can bid from at their site. And I think that is a remarkable example where the scientists have managed to bring the politicians so that this system can work. And the government at the Pakistan is at the moment spending about $1 million annually. It is our annual contribution. There is also contribution in the in-kind contribution. Now let me give you one more example. This is SESME. So the SESME stands for Synchrotron Light for Experimental Science and Applications in the Middle East. This is a typical example, I think the best example, where you can bridge the gap among different nations and through this science diplomacy. Look at the member states: Bahrain, Cyprus, Egypt, Iran, Israel, Jordan, Pakistan, Palestine, and Turkey. You can't even think about bringing these nations together. How to bring Iran or Israel or Jordan, Egypt on the one table. This project was initiated way back in 2001, and it was completed in 17, May 2017. It was, in fact, a small project which was just simmering. They did not want to complete. I was associated with this project since its inception, 2001. And many times when I was there, okay, I just let me share with you. The man who actually involved Pakistan in this excellent project was Dr. Samar Hasnain. He is working in UK. And through Samar Hasnain, then he contacted Dr. Ataur Rahman. He was the main instrumental in those days. And I was involved because I had long experience of working with synchrotron radiation in Europe for almost 15 years. That's why I was involved. And later I became the founding director of science. Okay, so the concept was to bring Palestinians, Iranians, Egyptian scientists together so that they can sit together, set up some kind of a friendship, and then you might be able to resolve these personal issues first through the scientific collaboration, and then you might encourage your governments to bridge this gap. I had a very tough time when we had to bring some Israelis and Palestinians on one table. They were not even interested to look at each other. But after 3 or 4 meetings, a couple of years' time, we managed to sort of start some beginning of their friendship. So this project started with a very nice donation by Bessie and Berlin, German government. They had a synchrotron radiation facility. They donated to Jordan. And this was built very near to Israel, at the border between Israel and Jordan. And the idea was that Israeli should come very frequently there, and at the same time, all the other nations, they could also join this excellent facility. And now in May 2017, this project has been completed. I don't know whether it has achieved its goal or not, but at least a very nice facility has been established in Jordan, and which is being used by a lot of researchers from our country, from other countries as well. Now, the Association for Advancement of Sciences in America, they have established a Center for Science Diplomacy in 2008, and the center's aim is to build bridges between communities, societies, nations through closer interactions between science and diplomacy, and elevate the role of science in foreign policy to address national and global challenges. I think this is a great initiative. In Pakistan, we are not far behind. Last year, we arranged a seminar. I'm glad that Kamran is around. He was also one of the participants. In this meeting, we gathered a lot of diplomats and presented some ideas, some our thoughts, and I think it was very well accepted, this meeting. Reason being, once you invite diplomats and your government officials, and then your scientists, I think that is an ideal combination. Now, there are certain elements for science diplomacy system. The countries are integrating science into their foreign policies. And then diplomats and policymakers are important to the world of science. The role of universities and institutions is very important. So the facilitation, the international science cooperations, then the coordination between foreign policy and international agencies. So there are numerous issues that are being raised in the context of science and diplomacy. Now let's move forward with a positive note. That is my message for my nation. So the way forward is science diplomacy to expressing national power or influence, equipping decision makers with information to support policy, and enhancing bilateral and multilateral relations. I think that is the way we should be moving forward. I'm grateful to all of you for sparing your time and listening to my very scattered thoughts. Thank you very much. If you have any question, I would love to answer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aslam Beg, and we will be taking the question at the end of all the talks because we are running late in our program. So we'll move to our next speaker. Our next speaker will be talking about Foreign Office of Pakistan's perspective on science diplomacy. And the talk will be by Mr. Muhammad Kamran Akhtar, who is a senior foreign officer currently serving as Director General Arms Control and Disarmament at Ministry of Foreign Affairs since 2015. He has completed his master's in nuclear physics, post-graduation in international relations from University from France, and he has many national and international certification and training regarding weapons of mass destruction, international border interdiction, and sustainable development. Arms control and government dialogues with China, Turkey, EU, Japan, and Pakistan, political dialogue and armed controls, talks, I was introducing Mr. Muhammad Kamran Akhtar. Apart from his, he has a strong grip. It is an initiative under his command at the Ministry of Affairs. I invite Mr. Muhammad Akhtar for this talk.
Thank you very much. And I would like to begin by thanking the Virtual University, Professor Arshad Salim Bhatti and Pakistan Nuclear Society, Dr. Imtinan Qureshi and their colleagues for inviting me to speak at this webinar. It is a pleasure for me to be a part of a very distinguished panel of speakers today. What I was going to say has been covered, a lot of ground regarding that has been covered by the two distinguished previous speakers. However, I think it will be worthwhile for me to say share a few thoughts about science diplomacy from a diplomatic perspective. The previous two speakers very aptly gave you their perspective from a scientist's point of view. The interplay between science and diplomacy is not new. Scientific advancements have been shaping and transforming powers of states relative to each other. As an example, the development of new weapon systems like gunpowder and cannons, they altered the course of history by shaping the outcomes of very critical wars. At the same time, it has been the hallmark of great empires to promote a culture of scientific discovery, be it the Chinese Empire, be it the empire of Harun Rashid, Mamun Rashid, the establishment of Baitul Hikmah, or be it the Renaissance European empires. In the recent past, the role of science in diplomacy has been codified by the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations of 1961. While mentioning the role of diplomats, the Vienna Convention states that a diplomat has to promote friendly ties. He has to develop economic, cultural, and scientific relations with his receiving state. So development of scientific relations is as such, by virtue of Vienna Diplomatic Convention, one of the roles of a diplomat. Whereas science, technology, and innovation continue to determine the military power of states, we are, however, seeing increasing use of science and technology as a tool of soft power, whereby states are influencing the actions of other states through the force of attraction. Science has become a cooperative endeavor. Few instances, for example, are the Reagan-Gorbachev meeting held in Geneva in 1985, which led to the establishment of the ITER reactor in France for international collaboration in thermonuclear research. Then we saw President Obama in 2009 in his Cairo speech reaching out to the Muslim world through the announcement of the establishment of a special fund to support technological development in the Muslim world. We are currently witnessing trade wars over intellectual property rights, and fundamentally these are wars over technology. People accuse each other of stealing each other's technology and gaining military and commercial advantage. We've seen lunar far-side landing by the Chinese, which was in a way a political statement of Chinese prowess in science and technology. While its immediate scientific benefits were unclear, states have conducted anti-satellite weapon tests in low space orbits, whereas any military advantage over the adversary can really be achieved through targeting satellites in the geostationary orbits. So it was basically a statement of advancement in science. science diplomacy has in the 21st century assumed increased significance. And the reason for that is that the global challenges of our era are transnational in nature, be it climate change, be it public health, environmental degradation, energy, food security, water security. And they necessitate collaborative responses. No one country, for example, can deal with the issue of carbon emissions if the other countries continue to churn carbon dioxide in the air. Therefore, these problems require collaborative responses at the international level. All of these problems, all of these challenges have scientific dimensions, and technology-driven solutions will be required. Hence, the rationale for increased scientific collaboration at the international level and the increased role of science diplomacy. Not surprisingly then, the WIPO has noted that the share of scientific collaborations involving 2 or more researchers in different countries grew by 25% from 2000 to 2017 and is still increasing. The previous speakers have already talked about the various facets of science diplomacy. Diplomacy for science, an example is what I already mentioned in terms of Reagan-Gorbachev meeting, which led to the establishment of the ITER reactor. Then science for diplomacy, the Obama speech in Cairo, where he was using science and education to reach out to the people in the Muslim world. And science in diplomacy, we come across it every day when we are negotiating instruments on climate change, on public health, on vaccines, on nuclear disarmament. Well, what is the role of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? Obviously, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is not a scientific organization, and we are not directly involved in scientific research. However, science diplomacy assumes significance for us because of the increasing relevance of science, technology, and innovation to the determination of state power. We've seen during the COVID-19, there were new measures for state powers relative to each other. We saw commentaries about a state rising because it was able to manage the pandemic well, whereas we saw commentaries about a state's decline because of its inability to deal with the challenge of COVID-19. We also witnessed vaccine nationalism. We also witnessed vaccine diplomacy when states were trying to reach out to other states through their vaccines. Access to technology is increasingly being used by states for pursuing their security objectives. Special waivers and statuses like the STA-1 level authorization for India by the US. This is an example of a state providing another state with advanced technology with a view to building up its strategic outreach. States have used science diplomacy for enhancing national morale. The name given by the Russians to their vaccine, the Sputnik, it was a signaling to the Western world that once again, the Russians have beaten them in vaccine production like they beat them in space journeys. And if we look at how power is correlated with advancement in science and technology, we see that China's rise overlaps with a sharp increase in China's share of world R&D expenditure. It was 24% of the world expenditure of R&D in 1996, whereas in 2013, China accounted for 42% of the global expenditure in R&D. And this same period coincides with the phenomenal rise of the Chinese as an economic power. During the same period, the R&D expenditure of North American and European countries went down from 40% to 30% of the global total. In the same period, the global scientific publications of Asia went up from 14% to 40%, wherein China accounted for 20 percent points rise for Asia. And the US and European share in the global scientific publications went down from 69% to 65%. And no wonder that in its ascendancy as a superpower, China is projecting itself to the world as a laboratory rather than a factory. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has certain advantages in terms of enhancing scientific collaborations at the international level, as well as bringing stakeholders together at the national level. We have a convening power. For example, we have established a group on vaccine production, which will be looking at possibilities of Pakistan's access to vaccines at the international level, as well as facilitating vaccine production locally. It will involve coordination and collaboration with WHO for pre-qualifications and WTO for waiver of intellectual property rights. And Pakistan's mission in Geneva are already very actively pursuing this objective. It involves bringing the R&D industry together at the national level, which has the capacity to venture into the area of vaccine production. It involves regulatory authorities like the DRAP, like the Ministry of Health, like the NIH. And it also involves mobilization of political support, which at times becomes difficult for the scientists, whereas for the policymakers, it is relatively easy. Therefore, all the stakeholders kindly agreed to work under the guidance of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs at the national level. Again, I can give you one example whereby the government announced $3 million assistance, COVID-19 assistance for SAARC countries. Now, $3 million, if we divide it between 7 countries, it hardly comes to $3 million divided by 7 countries will amount to nothing if we look at it in monetary terms. And that is where the Foreign Office thought that it will be better to try to contribute to the COVID assistance to the SAARC countries in kind rather than in financial terms. We got in touch with local ventilator producers and local producers of CPAP machines. We purchased those machines and we are now sending this equipment to the SAARC countries, which will be more visible, which will be longer lasting than consumable items which could have been purchased by the money. So that was Pakistan's response to vaccine diplomacy by certain countries. Recent example is the announcement of award by the IAEA for NEAB, an institution of the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission, for their remarkable work in plant mutation and biotechnology. On 23rd June, the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission issued a press release, but that press release was hardly carried by one newspaper if we look at the newspapers of 24 June. On 24 June, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs again issued a press release on the same issue, and it has been carried by the Chinese press, by the Turkish press, by the EU press, and it has been carried by the national press in large numbers. So that shows that how Pakistan can benefit from the expertise of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in terms of outreach. The obvious benefits for international collaborations in science and technology are pooling of expertise, facilities, and sources of funding. No one country can enter into big science projects without pooling its resources with other countries. And it is also very logical for the countries of the South to enter into scientific collaborations with the countries of the North, which are ahead in cutting edge research. Yet, I would like to highlight the potential for South-South collaboration because the countries of the South have same level of development and they are facing similar challenges. An example is the Ebola disease. The Ebola disease has been around for centuries. It's been known to cause deaths in the African continent. But since it was a tropical disease, mostly prevalent in developing countries, the Western pharmaceutical companies had no interest in developing an Ebola vaccine. They did not see it as a commercially rewarding endeavor. Therefore, for a long time, there was no work done on the Ebola vaccine. However, in 2014, when the Ebola cases started reaching the Western Hemisphere because of increased travel between the continents, that is when it took just 8 to 10 months for the Western pharmaceuticals to come up with a vaccine for Ebola. Same is the case for other problems faced by the developing countries, where the Western countries and Western scientific community might not be interested in coming up with a scientific response. Hence the need for South-South collaboration. And as mentioned by the previous speakers, Pakistan has been a champion in terms of South-South collaboration. Pakistan's role in the establishment of the ICTP in Italy and other such endeavors like the Third World Academy of Sciences, which is now renamed as the World Academy of Sciences, is well known. Pakistan hosts COMSTEC, which is the OIC's Ministerial Committee for Scientific and Technological Collaboration. And as such, Pakistan can act as a hub for South-South collaboration and collaboration between the OIC countries. What are the objectives of the Science Diplomacy Initiative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? As I stated already, science diplomacy is a vehicle for the pursuit of foreign policy objectives. We look at it as facilitator of national development because we need to access smart technologies at the international level to respond to the contemporary global challenges. We are trying to foster STI collaborations by bringing sharper focus on sustainable development goals implementation. We are also focusing on human resource development in terms of linking Pakistani centers of excellence with foreign centers of excellence. We have been facilitating the establishment and strengthening of educational linkages. At the same time, we are also marketing our top-notch universities at the international level because we would like to enhance the foreign student contents in our local universities as well. So we are helping the universities to develop international partnerships. We are also working with the NAVTAC in terms of matching labor skills with the international labor market. The NAVTAC, as you know, is running a lot of skill management programs. And we are helping NAVTAC to partner with world-renowned institutions in terms of joint degree programs, equivalence of diplomas and certificates, so that once our people get out of these institutions, they are readily accepted in the international labor market. Improving competitive edge in trade is one of the other objectives of the Science Diplomacy Initiative. We are exploring market for Pakistani technology products. We would like Pakistan to move away from commodity exports to high technology exports. And I already narrated the example of equipment in kind assistance to SAARC countries, which introduces Pakistan's technology products in a potential market. We are also endeavoring to showcase Pakistan's progress in science, technology, and innovation, which is the soft power projection. Not many people know that Pakistan has an adequately robust STI landscape. Pakistan can be proud of many achievements. Pakistan has been a collaborator in the Large Hadron Collider experiment, the CERN, in Geneva. Pakistan had been a member of SESAME, and Pakistan continues to collaborate in many other international science projects. Popularization of science is also one of the objectives of the Science Diplomacy Initiative, because we are fully aware that a nation, a people which value science will be respected at the international level. What are the priority areas for the Science Diplomacy Initiative? The entry point, as I mentioned, are the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Sustainability and climate change are our focus areas, because Pakistan is a country among the top 10 most affected countries because of climate change. So that is where we would like to enter into international collaborations. Also on energy efficiency, water security, food and agriculture, education, primary, secondary, tertiary, as well as technical and vocational education, maternal and newborn health, nutrition, disease, and all of these areas are aligned with the top developmental priorities of the government right now. We need science diplomacy, we need scientific input. We need inputs from our scientists for facilitating the diplomatic negotiators on issues such as governance of cyberspace, the militarization of big data analytics, quantum computing, AI, and what should be the international regulations governing these emerging technologies, nuclear verification. These are areas where we have to have scientific input for the diplomats. And Dr. Imtinan Qureshi happens to be one of the former minister technicals for Pakistan Embassy in Geneva, where he was advising the Pakistan Embassy on nuclear related issues with regard to the conference on disarmament. The role of mission abroad. We have already asked all our missions abroad to identify one officer who will act as the focal point for science diplomacy. And the terms of reference includes liaison with research institutions, with universities, with business forums, engaging with Pakistani diaspora who are active in scientific fields, students, business people, because they are the ones who, in the shape of advisory councils, give us useful advice as to the opportunities available in their host countries for scientific collaborations with Pakistan, as well as advice on science policy, what direction should Pakistan take. And these science diplomacy focal points therefore act as source of information on latest trends in technology development, opportunities for networking, university linkages, scholarships, faculty student exchange programs, joint research, distant learning, and equivalence of degrees, certificates, and diplomas. We have already achieved we've covered great miles in terms of fostering collaborations in health, agriculture, water, energy, and food security. An example is the role played by our mission in Toronto in terms of forging a partnership between NILOP, the National Institute for Laser Optics, and the Princess Margaret Hospital, which is developing latest techniques for early detection of cancer. And these laser-based techniques will now be replicated in Pakistan, and we will be installing these in the cancer hospitals run by the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission. Clinical data will be exchanged with the researchers back in Canada, and any research progress will be shared with Pakistan. Showcasing and narrative building. I've already stated that we need to improve the image of Pakistan. We need to showcase what Pakistan is doing in terms of science and technology. And that is where our missions are planning science exhibitions abroad. Pakistan is frequently holding science exhibitions on the sideline of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA's General Conference, where the PAEC sets up its stalls, showcasing Pakistan's advancement in nuclear application of nuclear techniques for health, agriculture, industry, and other fields. Product marketing, our science diplomacy officials, they inform people back home about the phytosanitary regulations for prospective countries of export. And then we get into collaborations with those countries' regulatory authorities in terms of building the capacities of our exporters in meeting those phytosanitary regulations. I've already talked about matching labor skills with the labor market. We are also building the capacity of our diplomats in terms of negotiations of bilateral S&T agreements, which includes transfer of technology related provisions. I will give you a very good example of how science diplomacy can be carried forward by public-private partnerships. It does not necessarily have to be a public affair. The OIC has an international Islamic university in Canada, the International Islamic University in Kampala, Uganda. This university used to teach jurisprudence to Muslim students. However, its rector approached Pakistan with a request to help them establish a faculty of medicine, because he was rightly of the opinion that if we are to empower the Muslim community, we have to bring them at par with knowledge about science, technology, and innovation. We at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs got in touch with the HEC, but for obvious reasons, the HEC did not have financial provisions for such collaboration. We then contacted a private sector university, the University of Lahore, which contributed to the development of curricula. They contributed course material and equipment as well. The financing for the establishment of the faculty was gotten through the OIC. And finally, the faculty was up and running, and it was inaugurated by the president of Uganda in a country where Pakistan did not even have an embassy. And Pakistan's flag was raised, Pakistan's national anthem was played. Subsequently, the president of Uganda offered a plot of land to the University of Lahore to open its own campus over there. And that campus with the name of Equator University is about to start its operation in Uganda, which will be a platform for Pakistan's outreach to a country where we did not have the financial resources to establish an embassy. That will be earning valuable resources for Pakistan in terms of tuition fee from the students. And that is how we can move from commodity-based exports to knowledge exports. I would, towards the closing of my presentation, I would, however, like to underscore the point that science diplomacy needs an ecosystem. It cannot take place in isolation. The first and foremost requirement which we recognized was to train our diplomats with the basics of science, especially focusing on those areas where international negotiations need scientific input. Climate change, public health issues, nuclear disarmament. And we have started modules on science diplomacy at the FSA. Similar courses are run by the British Royal Scientific Society for diplomats from the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And we would also like the scientists from our organizations to join these courses so that they are also well aware of the political dimensions and legal dimensions of the scientific work which they are doing. As I mentioned earlier, mobilization of political support is very important, because without political support, neither the scientists nor the diplomats will be able to achieve the objectives of science diplomacy. One of the major problems in terms of science diplomacy is the need for technology mapping and foresight. Once we know about our STI landscape properly, only then we can effectively conduct science diplomacy. Therefore, we need to have an idea of our areas of strength, our areas of weakness, and the areas where international collaborations are required by Pakistan, both as a recipient as well as a donor of knowledge. Without it, it will be very difficult, and we are collaborating with the Ministry of Science and Technology in terms of having a broad foresight and mapping exercise. I'll give you a very small example. One of the well-known commercial companies in Pakistan, the Ittihad Chemicals, approached the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with a request to facilitate their import of dual-use valves from Europe. And they required these high corrosion resistant valves for their caustic soda plants. Caustic soda is then being used in the line industries, in soap manufacturing, in manufacturing of cooking oil, and many other applications. However, these equipment was being denied by the European countries on the grounds of proliferation concerns. We tried our best. We couldn't get these valves from Europe. But then we contacted the HMC and we found out that the HMC can easily produce such valves. So the point I'm trying to make through this example is that had there been a proper technology mapping and foresight, we would have known that what facilities, equipment, and capacities are available within the own countries in terms of creating synergies between in the STI and industrial landscape of Pakistan. Similarly, we have to have a long-term STI planning whereby the science and technology plans of the countries are integrated with socio-economic development plans. Because till the time the politicians do not realize the importance of science and technology for the direct benefit of economy in Pakistan, it will be difficult to mobilize political support for the advancement of science and technology in Pakistan. Technology absorption is one issue. We have to train our scientists, we have to train our technicians so that even if we receive a foreign technology, we are able to properly integrate it into our system and utilize it. Finally, I would say that there are strong strategic dimensions in addition to the socio-economic imperative for science diplomacy. We need to use science diplomacy for soft power projection and image building of Pakistan. To rectify stereotypes about our nuclear and space programs, people only think in terms of weapons when they talk about our nuclear and space programs, whereas the strongest components of these programs is the civilian component. An example being the award announced by the IAEA for NAYAB in plant mutation and biotechnology. These are applications which are required in cancer radiotherapy, in food security, in isotope hydrology, in mother and child health. It is required to raise the national morale. It is a good response to Islamophobia, and it also highlights the relevance of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I will end with a few images. This is a publication by the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission, how they are applying nuclear technologies for the pursuit of 11 out of the 17 sustainable development goals, including good health, quality education, industry and innovation, climate action, life below water, affordable and clean energy, clean water and sanitation. These are the images of glacier melt assessments by our scientists and application of floating wetland for sewerage water treatment. This is a water cleaning plant, desalination plant, which was developed in Pakistan and which is working at the Kanu. The Chashma reactors, the equipment made available by Pakistan to CERN. Another view of that equipment, hadronic forward collar shielding. And let me also inform you that the detector on which the Higgs boson was captured for the first time was designed in Pakistan. Not many people know about it, and therefore the need for showcasing Pakistan's progress in science and technology. This is the sextopole magnet made by PAEC for the Sesame. It was delivered in 2015 through CERN. Thank you.
Thank you very much for an elaborate perspective of a diplomat on science diplomacy. And let me add a few more examples. Since you talked about the Uganda, I was through being a nuclear physician, I went on an expert mission and set up a nuclear medicine department in University of Kampala. For the first time, they started the nuclear medicine with the help of Pakistan, and also in Nepal, we are helping setting up the radiotherapy departments. And last but not the least, PIAS, which is the university run by Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission, has trained fellows from Yemen and from Nepal, Myanmar in radiotherapy and in nuclear medicine as well. Thank you very much for your elaborate talk. And we will move on to our next talk, which is a very pertinent topic nowadays. And it is science diplomacy in the era of COVID-19, and it will be delivered by Professor Raheel Qamar. Professor Raheel Qamar is currently serving as head of science and technology sector at ISESCO. He has remained professor of biochemistry and molecular biology at the Department of Biosciences and dean of Research, Innovation and Commercialization, CIIT. He has also served in many other top-notch universities of world. His research interest includes searching for the genetic causes of inherited disease. He has extensive publication in national and international journals. He is on ethics and IRB committee of renowned hospitals and also on renowned committees of Higher Education Commission. And he will be talking about the science diplomacy in era of COVID-19. Over to you, Dr. Saab.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shazia, and thank you, Professor Bhatti and Professor Qureshi, for inviting me today to this very important and pertinent topic, which not many people realize the importance of. And certainly the previous speakers have highlighted all the important aspects of science diplomacy and why the need for science diplomacy is there. Let me just talk briefly about what ISESCO is. ISESCO stands for Islamic World Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. And you can think of us as the UNESCO of the Islamic world. So we share mandate with them almost on most of the things that we want to develop: science and technology and education and culture. And besides these, we have started two more departments recently in ISESCO. One is a strategic foresight department, and the other is the cultural dialogue department, which we feel very strongly that different cultures need to interact with each other in order to, stop all these racial differences and racial problems that exist in the world. Anyway, before I talk about what we've been doing over the last year or so, ISESCO's main job basically, especially, I'll talk about science and technology sector right now and not about education and others. Our main job previously, before COVID, was conducting different training workshops in our member countries. By the way, our member countries are the same as OIC. We have 54 member countries spread over South America, Asia, Africa, and they're all Muslim countries per se. So besides training workshop, we've been also conducting different conferences in order to highlight new technologies and new areas of cooperation. And we were very strongly disseminating scholarships for our students in our member countries to go to the advanced countries and study in different fields. our main focus being capacity building of our people and of our nations. However, when COVID struck us, all these activities stopped completely. As you all know, that all over the world, the travel restrictions arose, and our work was mostly in the field. We were going out in the field and conducting our work. So immediately, all these activities stopped, and we couldn't really go out in the field any longer. So we thought, what should we be doing? So we slowly started aligning ourselves. The first thing we started doing is we said, we announced a prize for COVID vaccine or COVID therapy of about $100,000, that any scientist who develops a vaccine or a therapy for COVID-19 will give them a prize for $100,000. By the way, unfortunately, that prize is still up for the taking, and other countries in the world have developed the vaccine and therapies, but unfortunately, we have not been able to do that. The second thing we started doing is we started conducting virtual meetings. And these were mostly in order to understand what were the dynamics of the spreading of the virus in order to develop containment procedures and containment strategies. One more thing that we started doing is we looked at some of our member countries, and it was mentioned previously also by Mr. Kamran, I think, that Pakistan is very well placed as far as STI is concerned. And this is, you do not realize until you go out of the country and you see others, other countries, and you realize that we are not doing very badly at all. We are very well placed as far as STI initiatives are concerned. Anyway, so when we looked at some of our member countries, what about talking about advanced research and all that? They did not have the basic, capacity even to make hand sanitizer and sterilization gels and all that. So the first thing we did is we established protocols for hand sanitization gels, and we established startups, and not startups, but sort of a cottage industry in our member countries to not only make sanitization gels, but also to make face masks so that, the disease spread could be controlled in these member countries. And we were very fortunate that Al-Walid Foundation, they gave us $2 million for this initiative, which we have now spread quite a bit into Africa and other member countries. The other thing we did is our partners in Uganda, Mr. Kamran mentioned International University of Islamic University of Uganda. They developed a solar hand washing system with funding that we gave them, and that we are spreading into other countries also. So after that, we started thinking about, what are the main challenges that humanity is facing these days, and how can we go about, addressing those in a world which is confined now to their homes and to their cities and all that. And obviously, one of the major problems is climate change, and especially, all the disasters and all those problems that arise out of climate change. Loss of biodiversity is another major problem occurring all across the world. And when I say loss of biodiversity, I'm not just talking about extinction. I'm talking about, alternate species being put into places where they are not native of, and then them overtaking completely and causing a havoc over there. And we see prime example of that in Pakistan, where the Chinese mulberry was grown, and it created problems of allergy all across Islamabad and other countries. And we've seen other examples when the cat and the rabbit were taken into Australia, and it completely demolished the local populations over there by eating their forage and everything. And food security. Food security is one of the major problems that Islamic countries face, and especially in Africa, they face that. You've seen, those pictures, devastating pictures of hungry children, and I never can get that image out of my mind, where a vulture is waiting for a child to die so that it can eat it. So that is a major problem in some of our member countries. And of course, fossil fuel emission, which is causing all this climate changes and all that. And these are the four challenges which different people have highlighted. I'll add to it also another thing, which is this misinformation, which is spread through social media. And Mr. Kamran also talked about, governance of cyberspace and how to proceed with that. And this has literally resulted in destroying people's lives and their livelihoods and all that, and their reputations, basic reputation. This we need to really be aware of and address these. So we said, what do we do now? Since we can't, again, I keep repeating myself, but since we can't go out in the field and we can't interact with the people, what do we do now? So the first thing we did is we held an international training workshop on scientific paper and patent writing. And to our surprise, we initially wanted to do it on Zoom, and I had a limit of 900 people who could register for it. And in the initial week or so, it surpassed 1,000, and we had to expand our Zoom capabilities. Then it went past 2,000, and then we expanded again, and we registered we expanded it to 5,000, and then the participant went to 8,000 who registered for this webinar. And Zoom finally said to us, okay, enough is enough, and we can't expand it further than this. So we put it on Facebook Live, and we put it on YouTube and all that. And ultimately, 14,400 people attended this workshop, which was an amazing number, and which we could have never accomplished in a physical form at all. So this shows you the power of this new digital media that has cropped up to replace our previous working modalities and everything. And that was really very surprising and amazing for us. And that really addressed a need of the students. By the way, most of the participants were students from different member countries. It addressed a need of the students on how to write patent. What is a patent? How to write scientific papers, and what are scientific papers? And that is why we saw such a large number of attendees. Second thing we said, for food security, what should we do? We organized an international conference on smart technologies and resilience for sustainable agriculture in Africa. And that we organized with the University of Environment in Niger, Nigerian National Commission, and the German International Cooperation Agency in Niger. And that was very widely attended also. The third thing, Dr. Sharif is sitting with me here on my left. You can't see him, he's out of the camera, but he's sitting here with me on my left. We said, this year, 2021 has been declared as the year of women by His Majesty King Hassan of Morocco. And under that, we organized a celebration of the International Day of Women and Girl in Science. And again, 3,000 people registered for this seminar, and a number of them attended it. Another initiative which we did is we organized, and this was done with Qureshi Saab's previous organization, ComSat, and this is where we linked up with the diplomats. Shahid Kamal Saab was with us on this, and this was a virtual international symposium on green initiatives, planting trees to fight climate change and reduce carbon dioxide emission, a perspective for the preservation of biodiversity. So this was a take on the biodiversity. And again, like I said, ComSat was one of our members in it, and International Center for Biosaline Agriculture was also members with us on it also. Another thing that we did with Sultan Qaboos University and Naif University was organize an international forum on Earth observation and geospatial information technologies, application on natural disaster management and prevention. And 300 participants took part of this, spread over 28 countries from the member states, including Algeria, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Bahrain, and so on and so forth. And some of the other countries like Germany and United Kingdom and all those also attended these conferences. One of the things which we had been working in the pre-COVID era was awarding green cities in our member state. And our first award went to Agadir in Morocco and Nur Sultan in Azerbaijan. And these awards were for, green and sustainable city. So we added another dimension, and now we are trying to introduce some new technologies and some new terminologies and some new areas to our member states using these. We added a new dimension to it, which is smart cities. And this two-day international hybrid seminar was organized on resilient, sustainable, and smart cities. And this was, again, 4,000 participants on Facebook and 300 on Zoom attended this conference. After that, we thought, what else can we do which is new for the Islamic world? And we saw that space technologies was not very much, being worked on in the Islamic nation. Although some countries, even Pakistan, they launched their first satellite, I think it was in 1964 by Suparco. But after that, I don't know, our program sort of flattened out. Turkey and Saudi Arabia and UAE and some of the member states are very advanced in this. And even Morocco launched 2 of their satellites a while back. But when we talk about space technology, I'm talking about, not just rocketry and sending people to Mars or Moon or whatever. I'm talking about a whole ecosystem that needs to be developed for, interplanetary travel or interplanetary exploration or whatever you may want to call it. And that has a direct correlation of life back on Earth. Let's say, for example, let's say a few humans are traveling to Mars. And they are traveling in a sort of, I call it a sort of a capsule, which is a self-sustained capsule. And that capsule has to not only provide them, the proper food, but it also has to provide them oxygen and all these other things that is essential for life. And that can only be done in a sustainable fashion, where you recycle most of the stuff that you're excreting or exhaling, and then you grow your own food and you grow your own things in the capsule. And that sustainable agriculture or sustainable living can be directly translated back onto the planet Earth. We are living completely unsustainably on this planet. This planet was not built to handle the 8 billion people that it currently has. And it was not built for the 10 billion people that we will have in another 10 odd years or so. So we have to develop sustainable technologies that can make life on this planet sustainable and also ensure that, there is no abrogation of the environment and all that. And that can, once it's developed for space travel, it can be directly translated back onto this planet. So when we talk about space technologies, we are talking about a whole ecosystem that needs to be developed. And we held our first international symposium on space sciences, importance, challenges, and emerging opportunities in the space industry and Islamic world. And our motto on this was building tomorrow's global innovators. And this was vastly attended by a lot of people and very, very appreciated by a number of organizations. One thing that we are planning for the future, and now we are talking real science diplomacy over here, is an international symposium on bridging the gap between academia and industry. And this, again, is Dr. Sharif's idea. And what we intend to do is we want to bring not only just the university and industry together, but we also want to involve the diplomats and the policy makers in here to ensure that we develop, a sustainable policy which can be directly translated into the countries, our member countries and all that. And hopefully we'll be holding this very soon. I think this is a classical example of science diplomacy, where all these different stakeholders come together to solve an issue or to solve a problem that is related there. Mr. Kamran certainly talked about, translational challenges, and some of the translational challenges were not addressed until they became national challenges. Like for the example, Ebola, he gave an example of Ebola. Malaria is a prime example because in the, northern hemisphere, because of the cold weather, the mosquito was not there. However, as things started heating up and the mosquito started traveling into the northern hemisphere, malaria became a problem which was a transnational problem. And then the Western world started working on it. So it is very important that we in the Southern Hemisphere or in the Muslim world, we address these orphan diseases which others are not addressing and which are very, localized in our part of the world. All right, like they said, talking about transnational challenges, I think Francine Rivers said this very aptly, that nothing brings people closer together like shared suffering. And this COVID-19 has shown very clearly that shared suffering is, really bringing countries together to work on a common problem. We have seen examples of this before also. WHO worked on the smallpox and it got wiped out completely from this planet. And at that time, if a single country had refused smallpox vaccination, smallpox would still have existed in small pockets, and new variants of smallpox would have emerged, which again would have infected the rest of the world. And that would have been a devastating disease. So it was coming together of all these countries under a science diplomacy project that resulted in wiping out smallpox from on this world. Again, a problem which was addressed by the Montreal Protocol was ozone layer depletion, and that was a transboundary initiative also. And Mr. Kamran mentioned the COVAX initiative, which is a vaccine alliance which will impart, which will provide vaccine to the poor nation. And President Obama, if you all remember, he mentioned, and I was looking at President Bush's speech a long time ago also, and at that time, they mentioned that a pandemic was right around the corner. But nobody was ready to address it because the diplomatic, initiative was not there to really address such a thing. That was, a doomsday scenario. So people did not want to hear about a doomsday scenario. So scientists also did not very much focus on it. And if it had been addressed at that time, I think this problem would not have been that great right now. Professor Bhatti and others mentioned about the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. Do you all know this was an initiative which cost $4.75 billion US, and 10,000 scientists were involved in it from 100 different countries. And it is a 27-kilometer tunnel, or whatever you want to call it, which is spread over France and Switzerland. It was a classic example of transboundary science and technology initiatives. And now, Mr. Kamran also mentioned that Higgs boson was discovered in it. And now they are building a much larger tunnel, 100-kilometer tunnel, at a cost of $23 billion US, which is 1/4 the total debt of Pakistan. Can you imagine a single country investing that much money into an initiative? And it was only through this collective vision and collective initiative that this is going to be taken place. Human Genome Project was another, multinational initiative which took place and which was addressed because different countries were interested in this. One of the things my colleague has just pointed out, which we are doing for global space science, is a partnership. We are forming a partnership with NASA and Space Foundation of US, and European Space Agency is also wants to come on board. And we would be very much interested, along with our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and along with all our scientists and SOPARCO and other organizations, to initiate not just a dialogue, but to initiate a program of studies in space sciences and also initiate a sort of an ecosystem of work in making startups in space sciences and all that. Now that COVID is receding, we are now opening up more to travel, and Dr. Sharif will be going to Azerbaijan next month. And we are organizing, with Professor Bhatti's help over there, a reverse engineering workshop where we will be teaching people how to reverse engineer small medical equipment. And we are also organizing an ISESCO boot camp over there, ISESCO Launchpad, where we will have a boot camp for 4 days for 100 people from Azerbaijan. And then we will take them to an accelerator program for 4 weeks. And from that, whatever startups we are able to develop, we'll take them to a region-wise competition and then an international competition. And some of the venture capitalists and angel funds have promised us that they would be very much interested in funding such initiatives. And we hope to come to Pakistan also under these initiatives. Last things I want to mention is we have a strong collaboration with the University of Lahore, which was pointed out earlier also, and we are bringing in scholars from Africa to study in University of Lahore, and thank you very much to West Saab for that. And we also have a strong collaboration with Leibniz, which is a 96 institution organization in Germany, and they have offered us a number of scholarship, and we'll be happy to take scholars from Pakistan to study in Leibniz on a split basis. And besides that, we have a number of other initiatives which we are opening up now. And hopefully we'll be coming to Pakistan soon to launch some of these initiatives also. So once again, Professor Bhatti and Professor Qureshi, thank you very much for inviting us to highlight some of the programs and some of the things which we have been doing, and some of the things which we plan to do in our member countries in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Qamar, as you elaborated about the COVAX vaccine for the COVID-19, but the travel acceptability of vaccine has actually created chaos among countries, and the geostrategic rivalries have sprung up suddenly. So probably this diplomacy or science diplomacy has to deal with it. So we come up to the last presentation of our webinar, last but not the least, by the president of Pakistan Nuclear Society, Dr. Imtinan Elahi Qureshi. And let me take this opportunity to, as I have introduced him previously, but I would like to add that Dr. Qureshi was perhaps the first person who worked on the concept of science diplomacy when he was in Switzerland and Geneva as a minister technical. And he actually had contributed a lot to this science diplomacy concept. So Dr. Saab will be talking about the science diplomacy, the global scenario. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, two of the learned speakers have talked at length about what is happening with respect to science diplomacy in Pakistan. I would be moving slightly away from Pakistan, although Pakistan Nuclear Societies, one of the main functions of Pakistan Nuclear Society is to project the nuclear science contributions of Pakistan. However, this is not the occasion to do that. I'm very happy that the science diplomacy journey that we started at ComSats in 2015 has now gathered momentum. And now there are many more actors which are active. And especially, I would like to acknowledge that the Ministry of Science and Technology, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Pakistan Academy of Science, which are two heavyweights in this field, they are on board. My picture. Can I see my picture? So,
So we can hear you perfectly.
Okay, fair enough. I hope everybody can see my slides. They are being shared.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Now, if I start talking about global scenario, then everybody understands that this is a very big landscape, and this landscape is very varied. What is happening in other countries? What are their intentions? What are their progress? It's a lot of things to discuss about, and the time is very short. So understandably, I will be just touching some of the topics which I think are important. Although I have chosen for myself at least 3 different ways of looking at the situation in the world at large. Number 1 is, what are the real actions that people are taking? And also, what are the conceptual frameworks which are evolving with the passage of time? How people see science diplomacy after having practiced it for a while. And also, the most important thing, which in these discussions is somehow obscured, is that after all, what are the technologies which are making a huge impact on the way we live in this world? And we are pinning our hopes on these technologies to solve our societal problems and the problems that we are facing at global level and at national levels. So these are things that also have to be mentioned, if only very briefly, because these are very technical things. To start with, I must say that the science mechanisms are being adopted by different countries in a different way. Unfortunately, the world is very much polarized in terms of scientific capacity, in terms of political strength, in terms of economic prosperity. Therefore, the way the countries who are what is called a global north, they are viewing the situation in a different way, and the people who are in developing countries, so-called the global south, their perspective is very different. And I would like to mention a few of the things that the countries in both groups are doing. So it is a journey over the globe. I hope you will bear with me. Number 1, to start with, science and technology advisors. Now, it is well understood that science and the resulting technology, which is based on that science, is a very specialized subject. I mean, even in science, a person who is an expert in one field cannot talk freely about another field of science of which he is not very knowledgeable. Therefore, it stands to reason that when you are applying science and technology in solving problems, you should get the help of those who are experts, not only the experts in general, but the experts in that particular area of science. So it is impossible for the diplomatic community to understand the implications of things, even if they are given one-day seminar to explain. On the other hand, these are the diplomats who sit in the meetings, and they take decisions on behalf of the governments. And unless they have at their hand the advisors who can tell them the intricacies of the scientific underpinning of the topics that they are discussing. Unfortunately, the advisor mechanism is very common in the North, but not so much in the South. Advisory role is given to individuals who are very reputed, and it's also given to certain organizations. For example, the Royal Society in UK, or the Academies of Sciences, American Academy of Science. These are the groups of people who provide expert opinion on specific topics, and there are mechanisms to bind those who want the advice and those who can give the advice. Let us take a very extreme example. I'm calling it extreme example because United States of America is the country which can claim to be at the cutting edge of science and technology. They can claim to be the best in the world. And even in spite of there's so much knowledge in science and technology, they still need people very close to the decision makers to help them understand what is happening in the world. So very interesting that early this month, Professor Eric Lander was appointed as the advisor to the president. And the president was so keen to have him very close to him, that he asked him to sit in the cabinet meetings also. So this is very interesting. Now, this advisor has a staff of something like 50 people. He's a White House office staff, and he's now also sitting in the cabinet meetings. And the amount of knowledge that he can bring can be phenomenal. He is a person who's a mathematician, well-known mathematician. He is a geneticist, and he has a community relationship within USA in many organizations and many platforms. So this is a great bonus for the politicians to add value to their decision-making process. As I said, this process is not so commonly adopted by some countries, especially those countries where there's a parliamentary system of democracy. Parliamentary, I'm saying, is that the president has the powers in presidential systems to appoint people who are experts and who are not elected. But in a parliamentary system where the ministers of science and technology have to be elected representatives, unfortunately, they are the people who sit in cabinet meetings, and there is no mechanism of absorbing the talent which we have in scientific fields sitting side by side with the decision makers. Now, even in spite of the fact that president has a very big team of advisors, it was considered necessary to have a separate advisor for the Secretary of State in USA. And that I am calling it as a precursor of science diplomacy, because the realization that they had in 1999 was that the role of science and technology is increasing rapidly, and it is encompassing almost all the challenges that nations face at national level and global level. Therefore, it was considered appropriate to have a dedicated advisor for the Secretary of State. The first one is Norman Neureiter, who is now very active in bringing all the scientific community to the table where the scientists, where the diplomats take decisions. So this is one mechanism, and I think this offers a very good example of how science and technology is actually integrated into decision-making process, and this is the core of science diplomacy. The other way in which people, as I said, the understanding that diplomats need technical help was very elaborately quoted in this advice or the decision that was taken in this roundtable conference. It says about American diplomats, but it's valid for, I think, all diplomats, unless someone is very special. American diplomats who are typically generalists without a technical background can benefit from a better understanding of how S&D can be a door opener and a game changer and a game-changing force in diplomacy. The purpose is not to teach scientific knowledge, but to focus on developing an appreciation of S&T in foreign policy issues. Sadly, this kind of appreciation has to be inculcated. It does not come inbuilt. Now, coming from a very extreme example of United States, the next big prosperous group, industrialized countries with a lot of economic strength are the set of countries which are in the European Union. The European Union had a different mechanism because they are a group of countries. They have projects in which different countries participate, and they had launched a number of projects on science diplomacy, which were funded through their Horizon program. These are the three programs that I have listed here. One is called INS-SciDE, and the motto given to this particular study or process was investing a shared science diplomacy for Europe, inventing a shared science diplomacy for Europe. Now, you see, this is very specific to the region because you have to have a shared kind of approach, and for this, you need intellectual input. Similarly, S4D4C was another project, and LCSID was another project. All of these projects now have expired their project life, but now they are accommodated into an alliance which is called European Union Science Diplomacy Alliance. Therefore, you can see that the countries who are already strong in science and technology are also very strong in managing their scientific and technological supremacy to get the diplomatic advantage that they want to get in the world. Talking about the capacity building, the science diplomacy is being taught in various forums, perhaps not as a regular degree, but in various schools on diplomatic knowledge transfer. This is being accommodated. In Warsaw, for example, the Science Diplomacy School is held every year, in which the countries from the European Union and some other countries can also participate. So this is capacity building, and this is something which is lacking in some of the developing countries. What is lacking in individual developing countries has been compensated to a large extent by the World Academy of Sciences, which, as you all know, was started by, again, Professor Abdul Salam in Trieste. It was initially called Third World Academy of Science, which has now metamorphed into a World Academy of Science. But still, they are catering to the needs of developing countries by providing them opportunities of capacity building. And science diplomacy course is one of their very strong points, which happens every year. Last year, because of Corona, it was not held in physically, but 75 participants were there from all over the globe. So this is something good for the developing countries in capacity building. TWS not only holds courses within its premises in Trieste or online, but also physically in some other member countries. For example, this is a course which was a virtual course in science diplomacy held in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. Now, at this stage, actually, I should be talking about what are other big players in the field. And I had a set of slides for ISESCO and the nice work they are doing in science diplomacy. But when I learned that Professor Raheel Qamar will be talking about it, I withdrew all my slides because I did not want to repeat, and also could not match the eloquence of Professor Raheel Qamar. He has given you a full perspective of what ISESCO is doing. But closer to home, there's another organization, which is actually the Ministerial Committee of Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is based in Islamabad. And they also recently held a webinar. It's a hybrid webinar, rather, in which issues of science diplomacy were debated, discussed in the context of the members of OIC countries. So you see, these things in science diplomacy are happening at the level of nations, as you heard in the talks of Kamran Akhtar and Dr. Aslam Beg, and they are happening at the platforms of other organizations which are active in the world. By the way, it would be a good information for some of the audiences that Pakistan has 3 international organizations based in Islamabad. One is COMSTEC, the one which I'm showing on the screen, and there is another which is called COMSATS, which is a Commission on Science and Technology for Sustainable Development in the South. And this is the forum from which science diplomacy was launched in 2015 in Pakistan. There's another forum which is called Economic Cooperation Organization Science Foundation, ECOSF, which is also based in Pakistan. And all these three entities are doing something for the member countries while being operated from Pakistan. So let's go a little bit further. You have heard of Sesame, and but in fact there's another setup which was created particularly to advance science diplomacy for the Arab countries, and it is the United Nations Economic and Social Council's setup in West Asia, and this is operating in Amman, Jordan. But the pity is that all these countries who were supposed to work on issues of science and technology have somehow been trapped in political conflicts and the wars created because of home conditions and imposed from abroad as well. And look at the membership of ESCWA and Science and Technology Center, and you will find that there is Yemen, there is Syria, there is Libya. Now, what these countries can do under the prevailing conditions, which they have done. But hopefully, when the platform is there, it becomes activated when the conditions are right, and they will be able to contribute in future. Another example in which a local group of countries came out with great plans to use science and technology for their cooperation. It's called SARC, South Asian Forum, South Asian Association, rather, for Regional Cooperation. This is, according to the article which I'm showing on the website, is a redundant organization right now, because the political differences somehow were strong enough that the science and technology initiatives could not cross the barriers which were already there. So these are examples in which one has to understand that science diplomacy works, but works under conditions in which there is a political will and where there are other conducive conditions available, like they are in Europe. Now, coming to individual countries, I will first talk about a very big player, which is People's Republic of China. But because of their tendency to play down things, there is not much hype created in China about science diplomacy, but they are doing things which are phenomenal in nature. For example, their Belt and Road Initiative is a kind of science diplomacy on the lines of the Silk Route, on which the Chinese science diplomacy was based centuries ago. But China, with respect to Pakistan, is of course a very reliable player and partner to have science diplomacy initiatives. Another neighbor of ours is India, and we have to keep an eye on what they are doing. And it turns out that they are using some regional platforms as well as their national capacities to advance their science diplomacy initiatives. The important thing here is that they are bringing out journals. The Research and Information System for Developing Countries is also based in India, and they are coming out with the Journal on Science Diplomacy Review. Also, Global Digest of Multidisciplinary Science Diplomacy is called Science Diplomacy, which is being printed. There is a need for other countries to have similar kind of publications. No, not only very big countries, but even the small countries are actually punching above their weight. If you look at small countries, they are using science diplomacy in a very shrewd and a very important manner. if you look at the figures of New Zealand, you'll find that it's a small island state. But lo and behold, they have an international network of government science advisors. So they are sort of consider themselves as a hub of all the science advisors that they exist in the world, and they have the capacity to do that. The Sir Peter Gluckman, who was the advisor to Prime Minister of New Zealand, is on the lead, and he can put along all the science advisors in the world. Netherlands is boasting to become the #1 country in agri-export, although a very small country, but they can dare to say that a country like Canada, which is 200 times bigger than their country, is not able to match their capacity to export agricultural products. That is the scientific strength which they are using to make themselves an outstanding country in the Committee of Nations. Similarly, UAE is sending a mission to Mars. The scientific knowledge they could get from Chinese or USA, but it's a matter of prestige for them, and that brings their stature in the scientific world, and even politically, their stature is raised because of this scientific adventure. Austria is a small country, but it has an outreach in many different countries. Cuba, under many sanctions, but still going out in the world and helping people in Africa, during the spread of Ebola disease, their volunteers were there. Even Nepal, a very tiny country in our neighborhood, they have established a sort of a regional center for diplomacy and international affairs, and they are bringing out a journal. It's called Science Diplomacy Review. So all these things indicate that people in the world, in different countries, whether the country is small or large, they are very anxious to use the science and technology resources to create a space for them in the world, and to be helpful and to be considered responsible states. Now here, I will just digress from the main theme of what is happening in the world to looking at the philosophical aspect of what is happening in the world. And this is science diplomacy, the rationale of science diplomacy. And people are now even asking the question, is science always good? Remember that in 2010, the people who drafted the 3 pillars of science diplomacy, they had a premise. They thought that science is always good. But more and more people are realizing that science is good in itself, but it is not always used for good purposes. Now that is to be understood. Science is good, as I'm saying always, because it is the study of nature. And if you want something about nature, it's always good that you have knowledge. Knowing is better than not knowing. But how this science is transformed and applied for the purposes cannot be for the good of everyone. Now, when we say that science diplomacy is helpful in solving global issues, the conflict here is that countries have their national interest. And when they launch science diplomacy programs, the first thing they say is that it is for their country to achieve certain diplomatic goals. And in fact, they openly say that it is for their national self-interest. So what happens if a global interest clashes with the national interest? Here, it becomes it does not become an enterprise for whole humanity, which we very generously call ourselves as being as the custodian of the welfare of the whole world. Suddenly, it turns into a competition. The competition and cooperation are to be balanced in a particular way. Unfortunately, it is the competition that takes the edge. Now, in the beginning of my slides, I talked about a science advisor appointed by USA president, but not many people know that when he was appointed, he was sent a letter from President Biden, and President Biden asked him several questions, what to do. And one of the questions he asked was, How can the United States ensure that it is the world leader in technologies and industries of the future that will be critical to our economic prosperity and national security, especially in competition with China? Please note that there is no desire for having a common science and technology environment in the world where all are democratically equal. People are vying for number one position to the extent that they are mentioning countries with which they are in competition with. Now, it does not mean that USA wants to be at the leader and wants to do more research, but it also means that those who are in competition should not get the edge. If some country gets an edge on 5G technology, then it is also incumbent upon the science advisors to see to it that they do not cash this particular advantage for the benefit of their countries. So what is important is our economic prosperity and national security. Here, it becomes a very critical question of how to use science technology to ensure national interest as well as avoid competition, which in some cases is unnecessary. Due to paucity of time, I will skip because the issues are well known where we require science diplomacy. But what is not mentioned are the things that make it possible to solve international challenges faced by the world. It is the new technologies. And if science diplomacy will be playing a role in future, it will be playing a role through these processes. And if the countries are considering to build their capacities, they have to teach, inform, and create conditions for their scientific community to be masters of these technologies. And they can only do that if they have on their right hand and left hand side scientists who know these processes and which are emerging on the world stage. So unless there are mechanisms in which there are institutionalized communication channels between a set of diplomats and a set of scientists, the progress in future would very much be in doubt. Now, the materials that, the technologies that I have chosen are based on a division of what new materials are coming, what new processes are emerging, what new systems are being experimented in laboratories, and more importantly, what are the new energy sources, even to the extent of having new life forms. If I go into each of these technical subjects, it will be far too much. But I can tell you, for the benefit of all of our audiences, including students and diplomats in Pakistan and abroad, that the world is now focusing on creating new
Sir, we lost your voice. We are sorry, since there is some technical issue with Dr. Imtinan's laptop. I think we will be reconnecting with him soon. After this last presentation, we will be moving on to the question answer sessions, and we have had more than 500 participants in this webinar, and there were more than 1,000 questions. So it was really difficult for us to choose the questions which need to be answered live. Probably our participant will be answering these questions directly, but we will choose few questions. Okay, we see Dr. Imtanan now. Sir, if you can again start your presentation. It was, I think, your last slide or second last.
I say some concluding remarks because there was some hitch. Dr. Shazia, can I take the floor?
Yes, sir. All over to you.
Thank you very much. I was just actually closing with the following remarks that Dr. Raheel Qamar has very beautifully stated that the world is not built for 10 billion people. So some people will have to be sacrificed maybe in order to make room for all others to live happily. Or is it possible that science will provide means of 10 billion people to live on this earth and do that happily? In fact, many of the things that are listed in this diagram give us the opportunity of doing so. But the fear is that the old history of the evolution of life on planet, that is the survival of the fittest, maybe it will come into play again. So if you want to survive in the world which is now emerging on the basis of the technologies that I have listed here, I think one have to become fitter than one is. So this is a message for all of those countries and groups that are working for having a world in which everybody is prosperous, not just a single country. And that is a world for which we'll have to do a lot of work. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. Going back to the Darwin theory is, I think, not fruitful for anyone. I think the way to diplomacy and science diplomacy is cooperation, not the competition, which you said. So as I was talking before that we had more than 500 participants and more than 1,000 questions. So it was difficult to choose which one to answer and who is going to address, because many were very general questions. But I think we will go to the panelist and we will just float the question, and I will ask someone to volunteer to answer, because many questions are very general and many are specifically asked to some speakers. So I will start with the first question, and it is very interesting question: how to populate the science in Pakistan, especially in the urban areas. So any of our panelists who would like to answer this question, I think it is very, very, very important for us to understand how we can promote and populate science in Pakistan.
I'm Dr. Aslam Beg. Let me try to answer this thing. मेरा ख्याल है कि मैंने जो questions देखे हैं, most of people ने यही कहा है कि आप उर्दू में क्यों नहीं बताते. तो I will try to answer in Urdu. देखिए, science popularization is very important, और इसके लिए मेरा ख्याल है जितनी concerted efforts चाहिए वो आज तक नहीं की गई. Reason ये है कि अभी कामरान साहब ने एक न्यूज शेयर की थी कि जो नयाब को अवार्ड मिला है, और हमारे एक अखबार में छोटा सा हिंट आ गया. हालांकि इतनी बड़ी न्यूज है ये, इसको तो टेलीविजन पे एवरीवेयर इसको इतना ज्यादा शो करना चाहिए था कि लोगों को पता चलता है कि हमारे पास एक ऐसा इंस्टीट्यूशन एग्जिस्ट करता है जिन्होंने ये अवार्ड को विन किया, और पर्टिकुलरली फॉर एग्रीकल्चर. तो साइंस पॉपुलर उस वक्त होगी जब मीडिया इसको प्रॉपर टाइम देगा, जो 8 बजे हम मुर्गे बिठा दें लड़ाने के लिए, अगर वहां पे कुछ 2-3 साइंटिस्ट को बिठा के इस तरह की इनोवेटिव चीजों के बारे में डिस्कस करेंगे, अगर नया किन्हीं लोगों को बुला के एक छोटा सा फंक्शन करवा लें, वहां पे एक प्रोग्राम करवा लें, तो डेफिनेटली द यंग जनरेशन विल बी अट्रैक्टेड और उनको मजा आएगा कि हाँ यार वाकई ये चीज करने वाली है। एक चीज ये कि जो ही आप मीडिया वाले इनको साइंटिस्ट को टाइम देंगे टेलीविजन पे, तो दैट विल बी द बिगिनिंग ऑफ द पॉपुलर साइंस। और दूसरी बात ये कि मैं ये सजेशन दूंगा, जो लोग जिनकी साइंस अच्छी है, वेल कन्वर्सेंट है, वो मुख्तलिफ जगहों पे जाएं, मुख्तलिफ कॉलेजेस में जाके, स्कूलों में जाके छोटे छोटे लेक्चर्स दें, ताकि लोगों में एक जज्बा पैदा हो और थोड़ा सा वो इंटरेस्ट शो करें कि हाँ साइंस एक अच्छी चीज है। थैंक यू।
थैंक यू वेरी मच सर। जैसे आपने कहा कि वाकई बहुत ज़्यादा लोगों ने ये कहा कि आप उर्दू में इसको करें, और हमें इस चीज़ को शुरू से एड्रेस कर लेना चाहिए था, लेकिन हमारी क्योंकि प्रेजेंटेशंस शायद हमारे प्रेजेंटर्स की थी, लेकिन फिर भी बहुत बेसिक लेवल पे आके आपने बात समझाने की कोशिश की। एक और क्वेश्चन बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग था, और आई डोंट नो वो कौन इसको एड्रेस करना चाहेगा कि आप इस्लामोफोबिया को कैसे एड्रेस करेंगे साइंस डिप्लोमेसी से, जो कि आपने कामरान साहब ने अपनी स्लाइड के एंड में एक ये पॉइंट दिया था, तो मेरा ख्याल है वही आंसर करेंगे इसको।
जी बिल्कुल। इस्लामोफोबिया का जो एक फंडामेंटल एलिमेंट है वो ये है कि इस्लाम इज बीइंग एसोसिएटेड विद रेट्रोग्रेशन, illiteracy and some kind of animosity to the scientific approach. आई थिंक ये इसको एड्रेस करने के लिए साइंस डिप्लोमेसी से तो बेहतर टूल कोई नहीं हो सकता। अगर हम मुस्लिम साइंटिस्ट की अचीवमेंट्स को हाईलाइट करें, अगर हम अच्छे साइंटिस्ट प्रोड्यूस करने शुरू कर दें, अगर हम ऐसी सोसाइटीज बनते हैं जो अपनी प्रॉब्लम्स के लिए साइंस को अप्लाई कर रहे हैं और साइंस को वैल्यू करते हैं, तो ये वाला इंप्रेशन डिस्पेल करने में बहुत मदद मिलेगी। तो इस्लामोफोबिया का तो बेस्ट रिस्पॉन्स यही है, रादर देन गिविंग रिस्पॉन्सेज जो कि उस इमेज को, उस इंप्रेशन को रीइंफोर्स करें कि ये रेट्रोग्रेसिव हैं, ये इमोशनल हैं, ये वायलेंट हैं। तो इस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में मैंने कहा था। और इवन हमारी अपनी सोसाइटीज में, जैसा मैं कह रहा हूँ, सन में हमारी कोलैबोरेशंस का किसी को नहीं पता, हमारी जो नायाब जैसे इंस्टीट्यूशंस अच्छा काम कर रहे हैं उनका किसी को नहीं पता। जब तक ये लोगों को पता नहीं होगा, एक नेशनल मोरल नहीं बनेगा, एक नेशनल स्पिरिट नहीं बनेगी, हमारा सेल्फ इमेज बहुत पुअर होगा। तो जब हम अपना सेल्फ इमेज इंप्रूव करेंगे तो हम बहुत कॉन्फिडेंट भी हो जाएंगे, फिर हम वायलेंट और इमोशनल रिएक्शंस में नहीं जाएंगे। और हमने तो आज तक अपने बच्चों को ये भी नहीं सही तरह पढ़ाया कि मुस्लिम साइंटिस्ट की कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशंस क्या थी टू द डेवलपमेंट ऑफ साइंटिफिक मेथड। और इब्न हैतम का नाम लोगों ने सुना होगा, बट दे डोंट नो कि इब्न हैतम ने असल में किया क्या था। इसी तरह अल बरूनी था, ख्वारिज़मी था, उनकी जो साइंटिफिक अचीवमेंट्स हैं उनको भी हाईलाइट करने की जरूरत है। टर्की में फॉर एग्जांपल दे हैव इन्वेंशंस 1001, ये यूके में भी होता है, ये रोड शो होता है। उस रोड शो में दे present 3D models of what actually these scientists did, और उससे बच्चों का बड़ा इंटरेस्ट जनरेट होता है। तो हमें इस किस्म की चीजें भी करने की जरूरत है। थैंक यू।
वेरी वेल सेड सर। एक क्वेश्चन अभी जो पॉप अप हुआ है वो ये है कि हाउ वुड यू डिस्क्राइब द एस्टेब्लिशमेंट ऑफ अ लार्ज रिसर्च इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर इन द रीजन ट्रेडिशनली इन कॉन्फ्लिक्ट यूजिंग द डिफरेंट कंसेप्चुअल फ्रेमवर्क अबाउट द साइंस डिप्लोमेसी हियर प्रेजेंटेड। सो वो एक ओवर व्यू चाह रहे हैं कि हम इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर क्या लाएं, तो कौन इसको आंसर करना चाहेगा कि कोई एक overview दे दे कि हम कैसे
This question has been asked in English. Should I answer in English or Urdu? Urdu? बहुत सारे लोगों के। अच्छा जी, ये क्वेश्चन जो है अगर उर्दू में मैं ट्रांसलेट करूं तो वो ये है कि साइंस एंड टेक्नोलॉजी का इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर कैसे बनाया जा सकता है। इससे मुराद ये है कि वो कैसे इंस्टीट्यूशंस कायम किए जा सकते हैं जो वर्ल्ड लेवल की साइंस कर सकें, या जिसमें डिस्कवरीज ऐसी हो सकें जिनको हम कह सकें कि दुनिया की बेस्ट डिस्कवरीज हैं। अच्छा, उसके लिए जनाब 3 एलिमेंट्स दरकार हैं। नंबर 1 ये कि एजुकेशन सिस्टम स्ट्रांग होना चाहिए, नंबर 2 कि पॉलिटिकल विल होना चाहिए, और तीसरे ये कि नेशन को उस चीज़ को सपोर्ट करना चाहिए। یعنی کہ ایک طرح کا نیشنل پریشر ہونا چاہیے کہ یہ چیز ہونی چاہیے. اب چونکہ یہ کوشچن مجھے آنسر کرنے کو کہا گیا ہے تو اس کا مجھے کچھ اندازہ ہے کہ لوگ جانتے ہیں کہ ہم نے سائنس اینڈ ٹیکنالوجی کی پالیسی بنانے کی کوشش کی تھی 2012 میں. اس کا نام تھا سائنس ٹیکنالوجی اینڈ انوویشن پالیسی. پالیسی بنانے کا مقصد یہ ہوتا ہے کہ کس طرح چیزیں قائم کی جائیں, ان کا کیا پروسیس ہو وغیرہ وغیرہ. لیکن افسوس کے ساتھ یہ کہنا پڑتا ہے کہ پالیسیز بن جاتی ہیں, ان کے اوپر عمل درآمد کرنا بڑا مشکل ہو جاتا ہے, اور اس کے لیے جتنے ریسورسز چاہیے ہوتے ہیں وہ مہیا نہیں ہوتے. اب دنیا میں کس شخص کو نہیں پتا کہ کوئی ایسا ٹیکنیکلی ایڈوانس کنٹری نہیں ہے جس نے ان ایجوکیشن کے اوپر انویسٹمنٹ نہ کی ہو. کون سا کنٹری ایسا ہے کہ جس نے بجٹ میں ایلوکیشن نہ رکھی ہو سائنٹیفک انسٹیٹیوشنز بنانے کی. ہماری منسٹری آف سائنس اینڈ ٹیکنالوجی کے جو ادارے ہیں وہ آج سے 20 سال پہلے قائم ہوئے تھے. اس کے بعد کوئی نیا ادارہ ہی نہیں بنا, اور دنیا میں جو انٹر ڈسپلنری ریسرچ کے ادارے ہیں وہ ایمرج ہو رہے ہیں کیونکہ سائنس از پروگریسنگ ویری ریپڈلی. جو میں نے اپنی پریزنٹیشن میں ایک صاحب کا ذکر کیا جو پریزیڈنٹ بائیڈن کے ایڈوائزر ہیں, وہ میتھمیٹیشین ہیں لیکن وہ جینیٹسسٹ کہلاتے ہیں, وہ جینیٹکس میں کام کر رہے ہیں. تو اس کا مطلب کیا ہوا کہ دیر از این اوور لیپ بٹوین دی سائنسز اور میتھمیٹکس ود دی ایمرجنگ ٹیکنالوجیز ان بایولوجی. تو ہمارے ہاں ایک دفعہ نینو ٹیکنالوجی کے بارے میں لوگوں نے سوچا کہ اس کے ہونے چاہیے. منسٹری آف سائنس اینڈ ٹیکنالوجی نے ایک سائنس فاؤنڈیشن کو کہا کہ کوئی پروجیکٹ بنائیں, اور چند پروجیکٹ بنے. اس کے بعد نینو ٹیکنالوجی کمیشن جو پاکستان میں قائم ہوا تھا وہ ہوا میں تحلیل ہو کے رہ گیا. تو میری تان اسی بات کے اوپر ٹوٹتی ہے, اور جو بہت سخت ناپسند کیا جاتا ہے کہ جب تک ڈیسیژن میکنگ پروسیس میں سائنٹسٹ ڈائریکٹلی انوالو نہیں ہوں گے, جب تک کہ ان کو رسپیکٹ ڈیسیژن میکرز رسپیکٹ نہیں دیں گے, جب تک کہ عوام ان کو رسپیکٹ نہیں دے گی, تب تک چیزیں آگے بڑھنے والی نہیں ہیں. دیر از اے ویری انگلش میں نہیں کہنا چاہیے, میں یہ کہتا ہوں کہ یہ پاکستان کا نہیں بلکہ تھرڈ ورلڈ کا المیہ ہے, ڈیولپنگ کنٹریز کا المیہ ہے کہ کسی کو عزت جو دی جاتی ہے وہ اس کے اسکالرشپ کے اوپر نہیں دی جاتی بلکہ اس کے اختیار کے اوپر دی جاتی ہے یا اس کے امارت پہ دی جاتی ہے. تو پاکستان میں اگر جیسا کہ اسلم بیگ صاحب نے کہا کہ ٹیلی ویژن کے اوپر لوگ سائنٹسٹ کو ہیرو کے طور پہ پیش کریں, دیکھیں کس طرح لوگ اس کی طرف نہیں آتے اور کیسے پریشر کریٹ نہیں ہوتا کہ جی آپ انسٹیٹیوشن بنائیں, جو نئی ٹیکنالوجیز آ رہی ہیں ان کے آ جائیں. جب تک کہ عوامی دباؤ نہیں ہوگا, جب تک کہ پولیٹیکل ول نہیں ہوگی, جب تک کہ ایک میکنزم جو دنیا بھر میں کامیاب ترین میکنزم ہے سائنس ایڈوائزرز کا, اگر وہ لاگو نہیں کیا جائے گا تو آئی ایم سوری کہ یہ صورتحال بہت زیادہ بدلنے والی نہیں. تھینک یو.
تھینک یو سر. آپ نے نینو ٹیکنالوجی کا ذکر کیا تو ایک کوشچن میرا خیال ہے کہ ڈاکٹر قمر اس کو آنسر کر سکیں گے کہ ہیز بایو ٹیکنالوجی پلیڈ اے رول ان پاکستان ڈپلومیسی, ہاؤ اسینشیل از گڈ سائنس فار ڈپلومیسی. سر ڈاکٹر رحیل قمر اگر آپ اس کا آنسر کریں کہ وہ کہہ رہے ہیں کہ بایو ٹیکنالوجی کیسے ہیلپ کرے گی ہماری ڈپلومیسی کو.
بایو ٹیکنالوجی کیسے ہیلپ کرے گی ڈپلومیسی کو؟ بایو ٹیکنالوجی کا آپ نے پرائم ایگزامپل دیکھی ہیں, یہ جتنی بھی ویکسین جنریٹ ہوئی ہیں بایو ٹیکنالوجی سے جنریٹ ہوئی ہیں. mRNA ویکسین جو ہیں اور آپ کے یہ ایٹینویٹڈ وائرس کے جو ویکسین ہیں, یہ سب کی سب اگر بایو ٹیکنالوجی نہ ہوتی تو یہ جنریٹ نہ ہوتی, اور نہ ہی لوگ آپس میں یہ ڈفرینٹ ملک جو ایک دوسرے کو ہیلپ آؤٹ کر رہے ہیں ویکسین میں, تو نہ ہی یہ ہوتا. آئی تھنک یہ اس نے بایو ٹیکنالوجی نے تو بہت قریب لے کر آئے ہیں ڈفرینٹ ممالک کو جو کہ پریویسلی آپس میں کام نہیں بھی کر رہے تھے, مگر اس کووڈ کو ایڈریس کرنے میں بہت قریب آ گئے ہیں یہ ممالک. جی
اس میں میں تھوڑا سا ایڈ کرنا چاہتا تھا. ہمارے پاس بایو ٹیکنالوجی کے بہت اچھے انسٹیٹیوٹس ہیں اور یہ بہت اچھا کام کر رہے ہیں. ہمارے پاس نپجی ہے, ہمارے پاس کیمپ ہے, سینٹر آف ایکسیلنس ان مولیکولر بایولوجی, ہمارے پاس نیاب ہے, اور ان لوگوں نے بہت کام کیا ہوا ہے. پرابلم جو ہم نے دیکھا ہے فارن آفس میں بیٹھ کے, ہم اس کو کمرشلائز نہیں کر پا رہے, ہم اس کو اپ اسکیل نہیں کر پا رہے, اور اس میں ایک قصور ہمارے ریگولیٹری فریم ورک کا ہے اور وہ بہت پروہیبیٹو ہے. ہمارے سائنٹسٹ کو اتنی مشکلات ہیں ان ٹرمز آف وہ جی ایم اوز, ان ٹرمز آف فائٹوسینٹری ریگولیشنز, ان ادر ٹرمز, کہ وہ ان کو میٹ نہیں کر پاتے. اور ایک فیسیلیٹیٹنگ ہمیں ریگولیٹری فریم ورک چاہیے. اس پہ ہمارے ملک میں اس وقت کوئی فوکل پوائنٹ ہی نہیں ہے بایولوجیکل ریگولیشنز کو دیکھنے کے لیے. اگر ہم صرف وہ کر دیں تو ہمارے اداروں میں بہت زیادہ کیپیسٹی ہے. اور بایو ٹیکنالوجی کا تو فیوچر ہے آگے, فوڈ سیکیورٹی میں, ہیلتھ میں, ہر جگہ نینو ٹیکنالوجی کے ساتھ اس کی کنورجنس. یہ جو ایمرجنگ ٹیکنالوجیز ہیں یہ اصل میں کنورجنگ ٹیکنالوجیز بھی ہیں. بایو ٹیکنالوجی, نینو ٹیکنالوجی, آرٹیفیشیل انٹیلیجنس, دے آل کنورج. تو ہمیں ان چیزوں کو ایک ہولسٹکلی دیکھنے کی ضرورت ہے جو کہ ہم نہیں دیکھ رہے. اور یہ لوگ اپنے سائلوز میں بہت اچھا کام کر رہے ہیں. اور ڈاکٹر صاحب نے جو پہلے بات کی تھی, ڈاکٹر امتنان قریشی نے, یہ پالیسی کا فیلئر ہے. یہ ہمارا فزیکل انفراسٹرکچر پھر بھی ایڈیکویٹ ہے. دس از اے پالیسی فیلئر. اور پالیسی فیلئر اس لیے ہے کہ بیوروکریسی ہیز ٹیکن چارج آف سائنس ڈپلومسی اینڈ سائنس پالیسی. یہ چارج لینا چاہیے تھا سائنٹسٹ کو. تو انفارچونیٹلی دیر از سم تھنگ فنڈامنٹلی رانگ ود آر بیوروکریٹک سسٹم ایز ویل. تو میں تو خود بینگ اے بیوروکریٹ آئی سی کہ ہم ایک جنرلسٹ کی بیک گراؤنڈ سے آ کے تو سائنٹیفک چیزیں کر رہے ہوتے ہیں فار وچ وی آر ناٹ اکوپڈ. تو یہی سائنس ڈپلومسی کا ایفرٹ بھی ہے کہ ہم کنورجنسز اور سینرجیز کریٹ کریں. تھینک یو.
اس میں تھوڑا سا اور میں ایک چیز اور ایڈ کرتا چاہوں. دیکھیں جی, ریگولیٹرز ہمارے پاس موجود ہیں, ڈریپ موجود ہے, مگر ڈریپ کی جو ہے نا کیپیسٹی نہیں ہے اس کو گیج کرنے کی بالکل بھی. دیٹ از دا پرابلم. وی نیڈ ٹو بلڈ دیئر کیپیسٹی. میں جب کامسٹ یونیورسٹی کا ریکٹر تھا, ہم نے ایک ڈیولپ کیا تھا وونڈ ڈریسنگ کے لیے. وہ ایکسلریٹڈ وونڈ ہیلنگ کے لیے کرتا ہے, کام کرتا ہے. وہ 3 سال سے ڈریپ میں پھنسا ہوا تھا. وہ ابھی بھی ڈریپ میں پھنسا ہوا ہے, ایم پریٹی شیور. تو وہ ڈریپ والے ہمیں کہتے تھے کہ ہمیں تو سمجھ ہی نہیں آتی یہ چیز کیا ہے اور ہمارے پاس کیپیسٹی نہیں ہے. آپ ایسا کریں, اس کو یورپین یونین سے جا کے سرٹیفائی کرا کے لے آئیں, تو یورپین یونین اس کو سرٹیفکیشن دے گا تو ہم بھی دے دیں گے ساتھ. اور بھٹی صاحب کا بھی ایکسپیرینس ہے, ان نے وینٹیلیٹرز بنائے تھے کووڈ کے دوران. تو ان سے پوچھئے کتنا ان کو ریزسٹنس اور دشواری پیش آئی ڈریپ کی سرٹیفکیشن obtain کرنے کے لیے. اور کیوں؟ وہ صرف اس لیے ہے کہ ان کے پاس کوئی کیپیسٹی نہیں ہے اس کو گیج کرنے کے لیے کہ یہ کیا چیز ہے اور اس کا کیا فائدے کیا ہیں اس کے.
سر تھینک یو. آپ جو ایک کوشچن, بہت سارے کوشچن میں گم ہو گیا ہے, لیکن ایک جو میرا یہ خیال ہے کہ بڑا پرٹیننٹ تھا, سنس ہم ایک یونیورسٹی کے پلیٹ فارم سے بات کر رہے ہیں, تو پوچھا یہ گیا تھا کہ سائنس ڈپلومیسی کے لیے کوئی ڈگری ہے ہمارے ہاں, یا کوئی ایسا ادارہ ہے جو اس کے اوپر جو ہے وہ کام کر رہا ہے, یا کوئی سرٹیفیکیشن کراتا ہے, یا اس کے اوپر کچھ پڑھاتا ہے کسی کو؟
ڈاکٹر ارشد بھٹی, میں جواب دینے کی کوشش کرتا ہوں. نمبر 1, کوئی بھی انسٹیٹیوشن نہیں ہے جو اس کے اوپر ڈگری دیتا ہو. آئی تھنک ڈیولپڈ کنٹریز میں وہ انسٹیٹیوشنز جو پالیسیز کے اوپر ٹریننگ کرتے ہیں, آئی تھنک ان کا یہ کریکولم کا حصہ ہو سکتا ہے. وہ ٹرین کرتے ہوں گے پالیسی میکرز کو اس چیز کے اوپر. لیکن یہ سائنس ڈپلومیسی از اے جو اس کا پوٹینشیل ہے نا, وہ پچھلے کوئی 5 سے 10 سال کے اندر ریئلائز ہوا ہے. سو جو پہلا سینٹر فار سائنس ڈپلومیسی بنایا ایڈوانسمنٹ آف امریکن سائنٹسٹ نے, وہ اسی بیس کے اوپر بنایا کہ ہم کیپیسٹی بلڈنگ کریں, ہم کمیونٹی ڈیولپمنٹ کریں اور انٹرنیشنل کولیبریشنز کو فوسٹر کریں. اچھا, اب انٹرنیشنل کولیبریشنز 2 قسم کی ہوتی ہیں. ون از among the developed countries, ٹھیک ہے, وہ they work for new things, new ideas, and then the other one is کہ developed اور developing countries, north south کی collaboration ہے جیسے وہ ہوتی ہے, یا south جس میں وہ use science and technology to address the local issues. اب یہ چونکہ potential بڑا recently realize ہوا ہے نا, I don't think so any of the universities in Pakistan or in developing countries انہوں نے سوچا بھی ہوگا کہ ہم اس کو اپنے کریکولم کا حصہ بنائیں. اور اگر یہ بنا بھی نا تو probably this will fall under international relations اور policy study, public administration, اس میں آئے گا. Purely in science نہیں آئے گا. Although there is a big need now, خاص طور پہ CERN کا ذکر 2-3 دفعہ ہوا, سیزمک ہوا, ICT ہوا. We need to train those people who are going there
کہ انہوں نے وہاں پہ جو کام کر رہے ہیں اس کو کیسے ایڈوانٹیج لینا ہے کہ جب وہ واپس آئیں تو دے کین انڈیوس اور دے کین ٹرین مور پیپل یہاں پہ واپس آ کے اس کے اوپر. ایک جو بہت امپورٹنٹ چیز ہے وین وی گو ان ٹو دا کولیبریشنس از دا ایٹیچیوڈس, کہ ہم ایٹیچیوڈس کیا سیکھتے ہیں اور اپنی پرسنالٹیز کو کیسے ڈیولپ کرتے ہیں. سو اس کی ڈائمینشنس بہت ساری ہیں. آئی ڈونٹ نو کہ ان ساروں کو کور کیا جا سکتا ہے کہ نہیں کیا جا سکتا, لیکن آئی ٹیل یو دس از ویری ایکسائٹنگ ان دا سینس کہ اب کوئی بھی انیشیٹو ہے نا بغیر کولیبریشنس اور بغیر کنسورشیمس کے نہیں ہو سکتا. اور یہ کووڈ-19 از دا بیسٹ ایگزامپل کہ آپ دیکھ لیں کہ کوئی ایک ملک اکیلا ہینڈل نہیں کر سکا. ایون امیرکا واز ڈیپینڈنٹ آن یو کے ٹو ڈیولپ ویکسین. وہ آکسفورڈ کی, وہ فائزر کے اوپر, آسٹرازینیکا کے اوپر ڈیپینڈنٹ تھے, اور اسی وجہ سے وہ یو کے اور یو ایس اے کے علاوہ وہ کہیں اور جا بھی نہیں رہی کہ پہلے انہوں نے اپنے سٹیزنس کو لگانا ہے. چائنا جوائنڈ ہینڈز ود مینی کنٹریز ٹو ڈیولپ سائنوفارم یا سائنوویک یہ ویکسینز کرنے کے لیے. ہم اس میں کولیبریشن میں ان کے ساتھ شامل تھے. سو یہ ایک اپروچ ہے which we need to develop either by offering a course to people studying science or even studying international relations.
تھینک یو سر. آئی تھنک ایک لاسٹ کوشچن ہم پوچھ لیتے ہیں کیونکہ ٹائم بہت زیادہ ہو گیا ہے. یہ ڈائریکٹلی کامران صاحب سے ریلیٹڈ ہے. انہوں نے کہا جی کہ آپ منیمم ایلیجبلٹی کرائیٹیریا کیا ہے آپ کی آرگنائزیشن کا اسٹارٹ اپس کو لینے کے لیے. اسی طرح کا ایک اور کوشچن بھی تھا جس میں انہوں نے یہ کہا تھا کہ ہم مطلب ہمیں اتنی اپرچونیٹیز ہی نہیں دی جاتی ہیں اور ہمیں یعنی راستہ نہیں پتا کہ ہم کس طرح منسٹری آف فارن افیئرز ہماری چیزوں کو کرے گی. آپ نے اتحاد کیمیکل کی اگزامپل دی تو تھوڑا سا لوگوں کے لیے اور الیبوریٹ کر لیں کہ جو نئے اسٹارٹ اپس ہیں یا جو ٹیکنالوجی اور وہ اس طرح کے ہیں وہ کس طرح آپ ڈپلومیٹک ویز یوز کر کے اپنی چیز کو پروموٹ کر سکتے ہیں.
دیکھیں جیسے میں نے پہلے اپنی پریزنٹیشن میں بھی کہا تھا, ایک چیز تو کلیریفائی ہم کر دیں کہ منسٹری آف سائنس اینڈ ٹیکنالوجی سائنٹیفک آرگنائزیشن نہیں ہے, نہ ہی ہم منسٹری آف سائنس اینڈ ٹیکنالوجی ہیں. اسٹارٹ اپس کے لیے این ایس ٹی پی ہے, اگنائٹ ہے جو منسٹری آف انفارمیشن ٹیکنالوجی کے انڈر کام کر رہا ہے. اسی طرح اور پلیٹ فارمز ہیں, ایس سی سی پی والے ہیں جو اسٹارٹ اپس کو کافی فیسیلیٹیٹ کر رہے ہیں, اسٹیٹ بینک بھی فیسیلیٹیٹ کر رہا ہے. تو اسٹارٹ اپس کے لیے تو وہ فریم ورک ہے. یہ ہمارا ایک پرابلم ہے کہ ہم فریم ورک بناتے ہیں بٹ وہ جو کنسرن لوگ ہوتے ہیں ان تک اس فریم ورک کی اویئرنیس نہیں پہنچتی کہ وہ اس سے کیسے فائدہ اٹھا سکیں. نیورتھلیس ہیونگ سیڈ دیٹ, ہم پھر بھی اسٹارٹ اپس کو کس طرح فیسیلیٹیٹ کر رہے ہیں کہ ابھی ریسنٹلی ہم نے ایک اسٹارٹ اپ سمٹ کروائی تھی ورچوئل, جس میں کہ ہم نے وینچر کیپٹلسٹ جو کہ امریکہ میں تھے اور بہت اچھی اٹینڈنس تھی, ٹاپ 100 کمپنیز تھیں امریکہ کی اور انٹرپرینورز تھے جو کہ انٹرسٹڈ تھے ان انویسٹنگ ان اسٹارٹ اپس, ان پارٹنرنگ ود اسٹارٹ اپس اور وینچر کیپٹلسٹ یہاں جو انویسٹ کرنا چاہتے تھے. تو ہم نے اپنی اسٹارٹ اپس کو چوز کیا. اب کرائٹیریا اس میں کیا تھا, ہم نے این ایس ٹی پی والوں سے کہا, ہم نے اگنائٹ والوں سے کہا, ہم نے منسٹری آف سائنس سے کہا, ہمیں جو انہوں نے بتائے اسٹارٹ اپس, ہم نے ان اسٹارٹ اپس کو وہ انٹرفیس ان کا کروایا جو وینچر کیپٹلسٹ اور جو کہ وہاں پہ اسٹارٹ اپس ہیں جو یہاں پہ پارٹنرز کرنا چاہتی ہیں. اینڈ دیٹ سمٹ وینٹ ویری ویل. اور اس کے بعد سے ہم 5-6 ایکٹیو ٹریکس پہ کولیبریشنز کو پرسو کر بھی رہے ہیں. تو وہ یہ ہم کر رہے ہیں اسٹارٹ اپس کے لیے. بٹ ہیونگ سیڈ دیٹ, اسٹارٹ اپس کی چیزوں کو کمرشلائز کرنا, اپ اسکیلنگ, یہ دوسرے اداروں کا کام ہے اور اینڈ دے شوڈ ریچ آؤٹ ٹو دا پبلک.
تھینک یو سو مچ. بہت ہی انفارمیٹیو بیکاز جو لوگوں کے کامنٹس آ رہے ہیں اور جو لوگوں نے اپنی شیئر کیے ہیں فیلنگس کے, بہت اچھا تھا. اور ایک جو لاسٹ ہے کہ ایک ابھی ایک کامنٹ آیا کہ یہ جو سائنس ڈپلومیسی ویبینارز ہیں آپ ہر یونیورسٹی میں کنڈکٹ کریں اور لوگ پھر آپ کی جو ہے وہ ڈپلومیسی کریں گے, سائنس ڈپلومیسی. تو ہمیں 2 چیزیں سائنس ڈپلومیسی کے ویبینار سے جو کم از کم میرے لیے انفارمیشن تھی, ایک تو یہ تھی کہ یہ ورڈ کوئی نیا نہیں ہے, سائنس ڈپلومیسی کا تھیم بڑی پرانی ہے لیکن اب بہت ایز اے بز ورڈ یوز ہو رہا ہے اور بہت زیادہ اس پہ کام ہو رہا ہے. اور پاکستان آل دو نیو انٹرنٹ بٹ پاکستان جو ہے ایک بہت ہی اچھا سٹارٹ کے ساتھ چل رہا ہے. وی آر ناٹ اویئر بٹ چھوٹی چھوٹی پاکٹس میں جو کام ہو رہا ہے اس کو ہمیں एक कोहेजन देनी है और उसको आगे लेके चलना है, और लास्ट बट नॉट द लीस्ट अपने साइंटिस्ट को हमने एक्नॉलेज करना है। थैंक यू सो वेरी मच। मैं मिस रुबीना अली को इनवाइट करूंगी जो कि जनरल मैनेजर मार्केटिंग हैं वर्चुअल यूनिवर्सिटी की, कि वो वोट ऑफ थैंक्स इस वेबिनार के लिए दे दें। थैंक यू वेरी मच। आपका माइक म्यूट है रुबीना।
Thank you very much, Dr. Shazia. Good afternoon to honorable guests and participants. I feel really great honor and privileged to be part of this event from the platform of the Virtual University of Pakistan. We are grateful to Pakistan Nuclear Society for collaborating with Virtual University to arrange this event on such an important topic. We really appreciate the guidance of President of Pakistan Nuclear Society, Dr. Imtinan Lai Qureshi, in organizing the event. We are also honored and thankful to Pakistan Academy of Sciences and Ministry of Foreign Affairs for associating with us on this event. This day will be remembered as a milestone in the history of the Virtual University of Pakistan with regards to great discussion on an important topic of science diplomacy in Pakistan. Today, I take this opportunity to express my deepest gratitude and appreciation to all our honorable guests who made this event such a grateful success. I extend a very sincere thanks to Professor Dr. Arshad Salim Bhatti for gracing this webinar by providing a comprehensive introduction of science diplomacy. I also would like to thank him for his valuable support and guidance in executing this event. I also extend my thanks to all the extremely thankful to all the speakers, Professor Dr. Muhammad Aslam Beg from Center of Physics, Professor Dr. Rahil Kamar from ISESCO, Mr. Kamran Akhtar Malik from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Imtinan Lai Qureshi from Pakistan Nuclear Society, Dr. Shazia from Pakistan Nuclear Society, who spares precious time from their busy schedule to grace this event and by sharing their great knowledge and wisdom with our audience to make them understand the core concept of science diplomacy, how it works in the era of COVID-19, the foreign perspective in the global scenario. We are also thankful for the support of the Rector ICT, Mr. Essen, and his team for their valuable contribution and support. I also appreciate the teamwork of Marketing Department of Virtual University in all the efforts to make this webinar a great success. All the team members, Faisal, Junaid, Kashif has done a great job. We cannot forget our audience whose active participation encourages us to arrange such informative sessions. We are very thankful to our energetic participants. Once again, thank you very much everyone for your time and efforts. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Shazia.
रुबीना, मैं आखिर में अपने सारे पैनलिस्ट का बहुत शुक्रगुजार हूँ। रुबीना ने भी किया है, लेकिन वंस अगेन शुक्रिया जो आपने इतनी इंफॉर्मेटिव टॉक्स दी और हमारे ऑडियंस उससे बहुत ही ज़्यादा एंगेज रहे। Hopefully we can continue this kind of collaboration between universities and different organizations, और पाकिस्तान न्यूक्लियर सोसाइटी जो है हमेशा अपना फोरम, क्योंकि हमारा मैंडेट ही यही है कि हम साइंस को प्रमोट करें, तो हमेशा हमारा फोरम जो है वो हमारी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन वेलकम करेगी इस तरह के किसी भी आइडियाज़ को। अपना ख्याल रखिएगा और हमारी तरफ से अल्लाह हाफिज। इंशाल्लाह फिर मुलाकात होगी। खुदा हाफिज।
अल्लाह हाफिज।